Chapter 979. One talisman. 2 blades. Hundreds of miles. 3,000 Buddhas. It could not even be called a divine talisman. It was a heavenly talisman. There had never been such a powerful talisman in the human world. Master Yen Sei didn't write it, neither did the master of calligraphy. It had never appeared in the past tens of thousands of years. Ning Ke was now at the peak of knowing destiny state and a very powerful divine talisman master. But he had not surpassed the 5 states, so it was impossible for him to write this talisman. But now Sang Sang was in his body. Even if she was weak and about to die, a drop of divine power was like a sea to the human world. Because she was the sky. Ning Ke used the sea. He used the sky to command the world, so he could write this heavenly talisman. This was the real oneness of heaven and man. Who could resist it? Countless redwoods collapsed, and the forest was destroyed. Within hundreds of miles, only smoke and dust could be seen. Only the howling of eagles and beasts could be heard. The light of Buddha was still shining, but the Buddhas were dead. Ning Ke looked into the distance. There was a golden shimmer on the edge of the dark sky. He knew there were still many Buddhas in this world. They were coming here, and he did not know when he would catch up with them. He turned around and looked at the river in front of him. The river was about 1,000 feet wide. The water was gentle and clear. Except for some ripples near the shore, the rest of the water was as calm as a mirror. He could even see the stones and fish at the bottom of the river. The river ran through the north and south of the chessboard world. No one could see the source or the end. If he wanted to go to the east, he had to cross the river. Ning Ke looked at the far east of the river and frowned slightly. He walked to the redwood that fell on the sand by the river. He raised the iron cutlass and cut the huge trunk. Then he cleaned the trunk with the iron cutlass and carefully cut the other side of the trunk. It did not take long for a wooden boat to take shape under the iron cutlass. But he did not stop. He kept cutting off the extra wood with the iron cutlass. He was very careful and patient. It seemed that he did not care at all. Countless Buddhas in the chessboard world were coming to the river. The heavy iron cutlass became a small carving knife in his hand. It seemed that he was carving on the trunk of the redwood without missing any details. In the end, he even carved a flower on the side of the wooden boat. He knew what he was doing. He was practicing. The wooden boat was finally completed. It looked very exquisite. He even used an iron knife to carve 2 oars. The surface of the oars was very smooth and there was not even a single wooden splinter. Only now did he feel satisfied. He put the iron cutlass back into the sheath with his trembling hand. He pushed the wooden boat into the river and climbed on. Of the boat silently until he reached 1/3 of the river. Buddha's chessboard world was full of Buddha's light and malice. Only when he came to the middle of the clear river did he feel a little safe and dare to untie Sang Sang from his back. He held Sang Sang in his arms and put his hand under her nose. He found that she was not breathing, but he knew that she was not dead. This body could not breathe for a long time. He knew King of deep of soft of sea. Of seas of souls of deep of seas, of king, of spirits, he, and, he, see, he. He knew Sof was not dead. Her consciousness or divine soul in his body had entered a very strange state. It was like a deep sleep, and he did not know when she would wake up. Haotian's magic was something he could not understand. He was a little worried, but not too worried. That was why he was in the mood to pinch her nose. This action was very intimate, a common action between young couples. However, he and Sof Sang were a bit different. When Sof Sang was awake, he did not dare to do this. He had wanted to do all these things for a long time. He wanted to pinch her chubby cheeks, he wanted to pull her ears, he wanted to put his hands into her clothes for warmth and softness, he wanted to do all these intimate and wicked things. Although he could not do those intimate and evil things, he could do other things. Thinking of this, he kept pinching Sof Sang's face. After pulling her ears, he even pushed her nose up, making her look like a cute little pig. Ning Ke looked at her face and sang with a smile, "Hey, pig, I told you, I don't like being called a black pig." Sof Sang's voice suddenly sounded in his heart, "And if you dare to do these things to my body again, I will kill you." Ning Ke was shocked. Looking at her face in his arms, he asked uneasily, "Are you awake?" Sof Sang said, "I was not asleep. Do you want me to never wake up? That way, you can humiliate my body as you please and marry her." Sof Sang, lying in Ning Ke's arms, closed her eyes and motionless lips, like a sleeping god. But she was talking, which made him feel a little strange and difficult to adapt to. Hearing her words, he was a little annoyed and said, "What time is it? You only remember to be angry because of jealousy. The more you act like this, the more deeply you will be poisoned. When you really die, I will find her." Sof Sang said, "You go. If you don't go, you are my grandson." Ning Ke felt that she was like an unreasonable child, so he did not want to continue arguing with her. He asked, "What is going on now? Where are you?" Sof Sang said, "I am in your body." Ning Ke asked, "Where in my body?" "In my sense of perception." Sof Sang said, "I will be wherever you want me to be." Ning Ke thought for a while and said seriously, "I have always kept you in my heart. Of course, you should be in my heart." Sof Sang was silent for a while and said, "I am in your heart." Ning Ke laughed and said, "It sounds like you are shy." Sof Sang said, "I am not a human being. How can I have such humble feelings?" Ning Ke said, "Let me teach you. You were shy just now." Sof Sang said, "Boring." Ning Ke didn't have to worry about her being killed by the Buddha's light. He felt relaxed and happy. When he was about to quarrel with her again, he suddenly thought of something and complained, "Since you can leave the divine body, why didn't you do so earlier? Why were you hurt so badly by the Buddha's light?" Sof Sang and him were born together, so they could be one. But she was Haotian after all. When Ning Ke took the hierarch's Jianqi at the right to light in Peach Mountain, she only gave him a bit of divine power and he was bleeding everywhere. If she entered his body when she was at her peak, he would be dead. But now she was very weak, so she could use this method. Sof Sang didn't answer his question because she was annoyed. More importantly, there was a more important reason why she didn't enter his body. If she entered his body, her body and mind would become one. The bond between them would be so strong that it would be indescribable. It would be extremely difficult for her to leave in the future. Her silence made Ning Ke feel a little puzzled and a little uneasy. He thought about it but couldn't figure it out. He smiled and reached out to pat her face gently. Then he picked up the oars and continued rowing. The wooden boat slowly moved to the other side of the river. Just when the bow of the boat had just crossed the invisible line in the middle of the river, a large black cloud suddenly floated over from the eastern field on the other side of the river. The black cloud floated to the top of the river and stopped. The moisture contained in the cloud turned into rain and fell down. For a moment, lightning flashed and thunder roared, and the wind and rain raged. The heavy rain hit his body and face, making him feel hot and painful. Sof Sang, who was lying in the boat, made splashing sounds. He knew that her divine body should be fine, but he still felt sorry for her when he saw this scene. He untied the big black umbrella and held it above Sof Sang, thinking that at least he had to protect her beautiful face. Well, there was a flower carved on the side of the boat. Sof Sang's face was so ordinary that she was not as beautiful as a flower. Ning Ke smiled and thought to himself. He waved the oars hard, making the wooden boat shoot through the wind and rain like an arrow. The trunk of the redwood tree was very wide and thick, and the wooden boat was very large and sturdy. No matter how wild the rain was, it was impossible for the boat to be filled with water in a short period of time. He was not worried, but what happened next made him frown slowly, and his expression gradually became solemn and vigilant. The heavy rain fell into the clear river, making countless splashes. The river gradually became muddy. It should be normal for the mountain torrents upstream to enter the river, or the rain was too strong and stirred up the mud at the bottom of the river. But it was not normal for the river to become muddy so quickly, and its color became as black as ink in an instant. The clouds in the sky were very dark, and so was the falling rain. It was as black as ink, and the river had also turned into ink. It began to emit a faint ink smell, and then various kinds of stinky odors. It was very strange. Without any hesitation, Ning Ke reached out to close the big black umbrella and put Sof Sang's body on his back again. He carefully tied her up with a rope, and then pulled out the iron cutlass with his trembling hand, aiming at the river. Previously on the shore, when he finished building the boat, his hand was also slightly trembling when he put away the cutlass. At this time, he pulled out the cutlass, because he was very tired. He had not slept since Sof Sang began to have nightmares. Suddenly, the wooden boat slowly sank into the river. Ning Ke looked inside the boat and saw no leakage, so the enemy must be in the river. The river was very clear, and the stones at the bottom of the river could be seen from the shore. But now, the river had become extremely dark. Even with Ning Ke's eyesight, he could not see the movement 1 foot under the water. The river was very strange, and even his psyche power perception seemed to be blocked. The wooden boat continued to sink into the river, but he did not even find the enemy. Then how could he deal with the enemy? Ning Ke knew that he had to leave. He stepped on the bottom of the boat, and the speed of the boat sinking suddenly increased. His body had already risen into the air, and the next moment, he was ready to rush forward diagonally. There was still a distance of 4,000 feet from the shore. With his current state, it was difficult for him to rush so far in such a violent storm, but he wanted to try. Even if he would eventually fall into the water, as long as he could get closer to the shore, it would be easier to get rid of this strange river. Moreover, he reacted so quickly that it should be beyond the enemy's imagination, and disrupted their deployment. However, he did not expect that the enemy's reaction was beyond his imagination. The surface of the river was hit by the storm, and there were splashes everywhere. Just at the moment when Ning Ke just jumped up, a splash suddenly burst, and a white shadow pierced through the wind and rain like a ghost, and wrapped around his ankle. A huge force came from his ankle, but Ning Ke did not even look down. His wrist slightly shook, and a knife light flashed in the wind and rain, as bright as lightning. The white shadow suddenly broke, but then dozens of white shadows came out of the river like ghosts, entangled his whole body, and dozens of horrible forces dragged him down. The knife light was like lightning, illuminating the gloomy river surface. Dozens of white shadows were broken in front of the iron knife, but his forward momentum was also stopped, and he had to fall back on the boat. Ning Ke seemed to deal with it easily, but his heart was a little heavy. He did not understand what those dozens of white shadows were, and how could they bear such a strong force and forcibly pull him back. There was a cracking sound at his feet, and he looked down, only to find that the dozens of white shadows were whips, all made of white bones. What was more chilling was that those white bones were all human bones. These white bone whips seemed to be alive, and after being cut, they kept twisting and struggling, slapping the hull, making deep marks on the hard redwood, and finally collapsed into broken bones. At this moment, the wooden boat finally sank into the river. At the moment when the river was broken, the waves slightly rolled, and the dark water became a little clearer. Ning Ke finally saw clearly that there were countless hands around the boat. Those hands grabbed the bottom of the wooden boat, and kept pulling down, so that the wooden boat would sink. The wooden boat was made of hard redwood, smooth and hard. How could those hands hold the boat so tightly? Those hands were as white as jade, but they were not beautiful. Like the white bone whips before, these hands had no flesh, only white bones, and their sharp bone fingers were deeply wedged in the boat's wall. Countless pairs of bone hands dragged the wooden boat, Ning Kai on the boat, and Sang Sang on Ning Kai's back into the depths of the dark river, as if they were going to drag them into hell. The river was dark, and he could not see or hear anything except for countless pairs of pale white bone hands. The surrounding darkness was deathly silent, which was extremely strange and terrifying. "Help me," Ning Kai said in his heart. Sang Sang heard his voice, and the next moment, his eyes became extremely bright, as if stars were exploding in them, and the infinite light was enshrouded in the purest Haotian divine light. Now, she was his eyes, and there was divine power in his eyes. Before his eyes, the dark river suddenly lightened and became clear, and his blocked vision was restored. Ning Kai saw the owners of those bone hands, those pale white skeletons. In the river around the sunken boat, there were tens of thousands of skeletons floating around, densely surrounding the boat. These skeletons had lived at the bottom of the river for many years. Some of the skeletons' bones had turned yellow, floating in the water, and were sometimes broken by the current. Some skeleton skulls were missing a big hole, and black fish were swimming in it. These skeletons looked at the sunken boat, and their black hole-like eye sockets were full of greed. Ning Kai's hearing had also recovered. He heard the rapid undercurrent, the mournful cries of ghosts from the depths of the dark river, and the cheerful laughter of tens of thousands of skeletons. The laughter was so cheerful, but why did it sound so desperate? Thank you, everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 980. My dears, Nightfall is now ranked first in the monthly votes rankings. This month's momentum is not bad. I am very grateful to everyone. I sincerely ask for everyone's continued support. I have already booked a flight ticket back to Hubei on Thursday. I will probably be in Hubei for most of this month. Apart from handling my work, I will definitely put my heart and soul into it. However, there will be a few days in between that will definitely be affected. As promised to everyone last night, I will write 200,000 words this month. This is the total number. I will definitely finish it on the last day. For the remaining days, please allow me to freely distribute them. If I have time, I will work hard to write. I will strive to save manuscripts. I will work hard to update. I might not see an explosion, but I will definitely be writing very seriously. I know that this is the critical moment at the beginning of the fight for the monthly votes. There is no benefit in talking about this. It will only have a negative impact. However, just like in the past, I should report the specific situation to everyone in advance. I feel that this way of getting along is something I am more used to. I believe that everyone will be able to accept it. Please help me build up the momentum of this full month. Please cast your precious monthly votes and recommendation votes. Please help me calm down. Of course, even if my heart is not calm, I will still write well. As the saying goes, as long as the heart is there, the dream is there. At worst, I will. What the heck? In short, I will leave it to everyone. Please cast your monthly votes. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to cast recommendation votes and monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 981. There were tens of thousands of desperate skeletons in the dark river, giggling. Anyone who saw this scene would feel horrified, but Ning Kai's expression did not change at all. The river around the sunken ship gradually cleared. Haotian's divine light shone out of his eyes, illuminating the surroundings. Thousands of skeletons floating in the river looked at the light and somehow seemed a little dull. These skeletons had not seen the light for tens of thousands of years. They felt strange, but yearned for it. Then, in the depths of their consciousness, they gave birth to endless fear. The skeletons around the sunken ship suddenly peeled off, like weathered stones being washed away by the water. The remaining skeletons on the ship wall also instantly turned into smoke and dissipated. The skeletons finally came to their senses, screaming and fleeing into the dark river around them. Some skeletons covered their ears, not wanting to hear the screams of their companions. Some skeletons held their heads, as if they felt safer. However, no matter in the world of Haotian or the world of Buddha, who could run faster than light? Ning Ke stood on the sunken ship and looked around. Haotian's divine light shone brightly in the dark and gloomy river bottom. Countless skeletons were purified in the screams and turned into black smoke. The black smoke did not disperse, but surged toward the sunken ship. In a very short time, it soaked the river even darker, as if it were solid, and tightly surrounded him in it. Ning Ke's iron cutlass chopped forward, but he could not cut through the black smoke. The feeling from the edge of the cutlass was very strange. It was a little slippery and extremely thick, like some kind of leather or internal organs. Along with this strange feeling from the cutlass, there was also an extremely wild and strong desire. The desire was very pure, and there was nothing but greedy desire. Ning Ke felt a little stuffy in his chest. Thinking of the greedy look in the eye sockets of tens of thousands of skeletons, he was a little vigilant. He mobilized his psyche power, trying to force this desire out of his body. Thinking was also desire. When that desire met his strong psyche power, it was like fire meeting oil. It suddenly increased by countless times and burned fiercely, invading his consciousness. Ning Ke's heart was instantly paralyzed, and his face turned pale. He did not understand what had happened. Even if he could not force this desire out, why did this happen? The black smoke is a devil. Sang Sang said in his heart. Ning Ke still did not understand why these demons were formless. The devil of Buddhism is the devil of the heart. The poison of greed, anger, and delusion is also of the same category, but it is pure. It is in the heart and not in the body. I am in your heart, so your heart is poisoned. Sang Sang said, the devil of the heart entered the body, so the poison naturally broke out. The desire from the black smoke gradually penetrated deep and Ning Ke's heartbeat became chaotic. The three poisons of greed, aversion and obsession brought by Sang Sang finally broke out. Ning Ke was in so much pain that he spat a mouthful of blood into the black smoke in front of him. With a sizzling sound, the black smoke was burned by an invisible flame, twisting and twisting like a dark cloud in the wind. It seemed to be in extreme pain, and there was a faint feeling of pain coming from the depths. At this moment, Sang Sang was helping him. His body was filled with Haotian's divine light, and so was his blood. It was filled with the power of holy light. After his blood entered the black smoke, it began to be purified. Ning Ke knew what to do. He raised the iron cutlass and cut his palm hard. His great spirit had almost reached the advanced level, and his body was as hard as a rock. But this was his own intention. His iron cutlass was cold and ruthless, but it still cut his palm. Blood gradually seeped out and stained the black iron cutlass. He raised his head and held the cutlass tightly with his left hand, stabbing at the thick black smoke in front of him. The feeling from the cutlass was still tough and sticky, but as the blood on the cutlass seeped into the black smoke, the feeling gradually faded, and the cutlass gradually penetrated 1 foot into the black smoke. Ning Ke's great spirit rose, and his right hand hit the cutlass heavily like an iron hammer. The two powerful forces overlapped, like the waves on the river. With a puff, the iron cutlass completely sank into the black smoke. Countless Haotian's divine light spurted out from the iron cutlass, and the black smoke kept struggling, as if its internal organs were wriggling. It looked a little disgusting and a little scary. There was a strong burning smell in the black smoke. Light shone from the cutlass, and then spread around at a speed visible to the naked eye, illuminating the bottom of the river and revealing the true appearance of the devil inside. The devil of the heart was an illusory thing. It was shapeless and had no body. It was just the black smoke. But in the black smoke that hung at the bottom of the river like a curtain, there were countless wronged souls and desires. Ning Ke even saw his own face in it. He was very clear that if he continued to fight with the devil inside like this, he would eventually enter a battle at the level of consciousness. If it was in the past, he would naturally not be afraid. But now Sang Sang was in his heart, and he was also infected with the three poisons of greed, anger and obsession. He absolutely refused to let the devil inside his body, which was too dangerous. Hao Tian's divine light continued to burn as if it was endless. The iron cutlass in the black smoke loosened a little. Ning Ke stood at the bow of the sunken ship, poured the Great Spirit into his arms, and pulled hard. There was a loud crashing sound. It was not the sound of water, because this was the bottom of the river, not the surface of the river. No matter how big the waves were, they would not make such a sound. It was the sound of the black smoke being cut. Thousands of ghosts, and more than a dozen sticky things formed by desires, gushed out from the cut made by the iron cutlass. Ning Ke pretended not to see this disgusting and strange scene. He lowered his head and continued to move his wrist. The iron cutlass kept moving in the black smoke, and in an instant, it was cut into countless pieces. The black curtain was broken, and the original body of the devil inside was destroyed. Just like the fish was broken, countless ghosts and sticky things formed by desires gushed out from the fish, like water gushing out from the fish, and gushed toward the sunken ship. Those sticky things formed by desires could not travel far after losing the devil's body, and slowly sank to the bottom of the river. Those ghosts, which were weightless, drifted along the current to the sunken ship. Countless ghosts avoided the iron cutlass that was burning with divine light and climbed onto Ning Ke's clothes. They began to desperately drill into his body, and kept making joyful cries. Their cries were weak and thin, like mosquitoes. Many ghosts fell on the sunken ship and crawled toward Sang Sang's divine body. They felt that this body was more delicious and stronger, and so they cried even more joyfully. However, when these ghosts really climbed onto Sang Sang's divine body, their joyful cries quickly turned into screams of horror, and the next moment, they were purified into nothingness. Ning Ke's eyes were like stars, and he could see everything clearly. He could feel the coldness coming from his skin. He could feel the extreme coldness brought by countless ghosts, as well as the hatred and unwillingness. It was very similar to the array intent of the secluded pavilion that he had felt on the precipice of Peach Mountain. With Sang Sang's help, his body now had endless Hao Tian's divine light, but he could not purify these ghosts with his congenital power like Sang Sang's divine body could. Logically speaking, he should have forced out the Hao Tian divine light in his body and directly burned these ghosts to death. However, thinking that Sang Sang was deeply poisoned, and the battle after seeing Buddha was the most important thing, he wanted to save some energy, so he did nothing and let countless ghosts climb onto his body. In a very short time, the sunken ship was occupied by countless ghosts. The middle part of the ship where Sang Sang's body was very clean, while the bow of the ship was much more lively and terrifying. Thousands of ghosts had squeezed into a huge black ball, like a school of fish at the bottom of the sea, and Ning Ke was in the deepest part. He looked through the ghosts in front of him and saw a ghost desperately drilling into his shoe. He lifted his knee and then fell down, trampling the ghost into several soul threads. As he moved, the resentful souls and imps attached to the surface of his body floated like seaweed, but none of them fell. Those ghosts greedily tore at his clothes, gnawed at his skin, and sent countless resentful thoughts into his body, wanting to drill into his flesh and soul. For cultivators, this situation was very terrible, but Ning Ke was very calm. He had experienced this feeling, or rather, the pain. He knew that as long as he was calm, there would be no danger. Since he was a child, he had walked between life and death and suffered all kinds of suffering in the world. Later, he entered the academy to cultivate the peerless Dharma, faced the wall in the Xiankong temple, and cultivated Buddhism in the world of the chessboard for countless years. When it came to calmness, how many people in the world could surpass him? Ning Ke did not move, and the ghosts in the river kept pouncing on the sunken ship. The soul mass became bigger and bigger, and was about to touch the water. He closed his eyes in the soul mass, waiting for the moment to come. After a while, most of the vengeful spirits and imps in the river came to the sunken ship and surrounded him. They kept humming complacently. Occasionally, a few imps floated outside, looking very anxious. Little ghosts, don't be too naughty, Ning Ke thought. With a slight change of his thoughts, an extremely bright red color appeared at the bottom of the dark river. Accompanied by an extremely violent whistling sound, the dark red vermilion bird flew away from the iron blade and danced around his body at a high speed. Wherever the vermilion bird's wings passed, the river water evaporated into bubbles and blazing fire spurted out. The ghosts around Ning Ke had no time to escape, and they all turned into smoke with a sad cry. In an instant, the bow of the ship became very clear. There was only the clear river water around Ning Quebec. Where were the ghosts and the cold and resentful psyche? More than a dozen ghosts did not squeeze into the ship. They were a little unwilling, but they did not expect the situation to change so dramatically. They desperately fled to the darkness of the river, screaming in horror. How could the vermilion bird let these evil things escape? With a fierce whistle, it flapped its wings and flew again, chasing those ghosts. With a light flap of its wings, those ghosts turned into smoke. However, when the vermilion bird was proud and ready to fly back to the sunken ship, a white shadow suddenly appeared in the dark river. It stretched out like lightning and tied up the vermilion bird. The vermilion bird screamed angrily and kept flapping its wings, but it could not move at all. Looking at this scene, Ning Ke was slightly shocked. He was very clear that as the killing talisman of the God-stunning array, the vermilion bird's strength was close to the peak of knowing destiny state. The white shadow could easily suppress it, so it must have the strength above the 5 states. What was that white shadow? Ning Ke felt that it was a little familiar. He took a closer look and found that it was indeed a white bone whip, but it was many times thicker than the ones on the river. At this moment, the white bone whip slowly moved out of the dark river. The vermilion bird was tied up by the white bone whip and could not escape. It was very miserable. Ning Ke looked at the white bone whip that was gradually moving out of the dark water, and his expression became more and more solemn. When he saw the huge figure behind the white bone whip, he was even more shocked and speechless. Yesterday's chapter name was not very suitable, so I did not use it. I directly used the new chapter name. I will try to finish the next chapter before 12:30. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 982. A white bone slowly protruded from the dark river. The scene was very strange and horrible. Behind the white bone, there was a huge black shadow, emitting infinite power. The river gradually parted, and the white bone moved forward. Then 2 more white bones appeared below. These 2 bones had no joints and were very smooth and sharp, looking like 2 spears. It turned out that the thick white bone that appeared at the beginning was not a whip at all, but a very long trunk. The flesh and thick skin on it were all gone, leaving only the ghastly white bone. Only an elephant's trunk could be so long, and the 2 sharp white bones below were elephant's tusks. Looking at the huge figure in the dark river, Ning Ke slowly clenched the hilt in his hand. A giant elephant appeared at the bottom of the river. It was dozens of feet high and as huge as a mountain. Compared with it, the sunken ship seemed very small. The flesh and blood on the elephant had long been eaten away, leaving only the ghastly white bone. The bone elephant slowly walked to the sunken ship, and the vermilion bird was wrapped in the front end of its long trunk, which was composed of countless fine white bones. The vermilion bird had no strength to struggle and seemed to be dying. As the giant bone elephant walked, a majestic and gloomy aura of Buddha pressed to the bow of the ship. Ning Ke's body became a little stiff, but he thought that the elephant's trunk should have no bones. This was the Buddha's nirvana, a hellish river bottom. The elephant's trunk should have bones, but the resentful soul refused to disperse. How could he reason with it? If he couldn't reason with it, then he could only fight. However, looking at the monk sitting on the back of the bone elephant and feeling the powerful Buddha's power, Ning Ke did not dare to fight casually. The monk wore a Buddhist crown decorated with 10 square gems, a kasaya embroidered with thousands of miles of golden threads, and a 9-ringed golden staff in his hand. The river passed through the head of the staff, making a crisp sound. Sitting on the back of the bone elephant, the monk seemed very small, but he was very tall. His face was compassionate and firm. Countless rivers flowed in front of him, but he was still calm, giving people a feeling of unfathomable. In this world, Ning Ke had met many Buddhas, such as the masked Buddha transformed by monk Qingban, and the ancient Dipankara Buddha on the street. Some Buddhas were very powerful, and some were very weak. But no matter how powerful they were, they could not hold on for too long before he and Sang Sang joined hands. It was not until now that Ning Ke saw the skeletal elephant and the monk on its back that he knew that he and Sang Sang had finally met a truly powerful opponent. He even felt a little scared. The skeletal elephant slowly walked to the sunken ship. The river gradually cleared. Ning Ke looked at the monk and shouted, "Who are you?" The monk replied, "I am not a Buddha, I am a bodhisattva." Ning Ke was slightly startled and said, "I have seen countless Buddhas in this nirvana, but I have never seen any Buddha stronger than you. Why haven't you become a Buddha?" The monk replied calmly, "If hell is not empty, I swear not to become a Buddha." These simple words made Ning Ke silent for a long time. He asked with mixed emotions, "Ksitigarbha?" The monk looked resolute and compassionate. The jewels in the Buddhist crown and the golden threads on the kasaya shone brightly, illuminating the bottom of the river. Even the river of tens of thousands of miles became clear. The remaining skeletons and the wandering souls hiding in the dark river and mud all showed up. They were not afraid of the light of Buddha. Instead, they became much calmer and knelt down to the monk on the skeletal elephant. Countless skeletons and wandering souls bowed to him. There was a dense rubbing sound at the bottom of the river. It was the sound of bones rubbing against each other. Even the broken bones that were cut by Ning Ke floated up. The dark river like hell was purified by great compassion. This was the state of Ksitigarbha. Although he was a bodhisattva, he emitted a stronger light of Buddha than any other Buddhas. If a Buddhist follower saw this scene, he would probably be moved to tears, kneeling and worshipping the monk on the bone elephant. Even Ning Ke was a little moved, but he calmed down faster than Ning Quebec. Only devout followers of Buddha would have their consciousness come to the chessboard and enter the nirvana after death. Then where did the resentful souls, imps, and skeletons under the river come from? Ksitigarbha seemed to know what Ning Ke was thinking. He said slowly, "As long as the sinners believe in Buddha, they will also be brought to the nirvana after death. Heaven is also hell." Ning Ke understood it quickly. He looked at Ksitigarbha and asked, "These sinful followers are brought to the chessboard after death and suppressed at the bottom of the river to suffer endless pain. How can they be empty?" Ksitigarbha looked at the ghosts at the bottom of the river and said mercifully, "As long as they sincerely convert to Buddha and achieve good results with good intentions and deeds, they will finally be freed." As soon as he said this, tens of thousands of ghosts bowed again and cried together. The river was full of repentance. Ning Ke looked at Ksitigarbha and said, "You are the same as other Buddhas. You all like to talk nonsense." As soon as he said this, tens of thousands of ghosts rose together and were angry. The river was full of anger. Ksitigarbha was not angry. He put his palms together and asked, "Please enlighten me." Ning Ke pointed at the ghosts and skeletons in the river and said, "Good intentions are easy to talk about. But this world is full of Buddhas. Where can they go to do good deeds? And if they were sinners when they were alive, they should be suppressed in hell and never be able to rise again. They can be freed by chanting a few words of Buddha. What will those who were harmed by them think? Ksitigarbha said, You are wrong. Ning-Ke was not willing to reason or talk about the Dharma. He raised the iron cutlass and stopped Ksitigarbha from talking. He looked at Ksitigarbha and his eyes became unusually bright, as if there was golden light overflowing. Maybe I am wrong, but I will not be wrong. You are not Ksitigarbha at all. He looked at the monk and shouted, Don't even think about escaping my fiery eyes. Quickly show your real body, or eat my staff. He felt that his words were proud and funny, but only Sang Sang in his heart understood it. Ksitigarbha did not understand and looked a little lost. Countless ghosts began to roar angrily. How disrespectful it was to call Ksitigarbha a fake bodhisattva in front of him. Ksitigarbha was still not angry. He said with a smile, If you say yes, then yes. If you say no, then no. It doesn't matter whether you are a bodhisattva or not. What matters is what you do. The ghosts at the bottom of the river were overjoyed and bowed again after hearing the wonderful words. Ning-Ke was not moved and shouted, Patience is as still as the earth, and meditation is as deep as a secret. I don't know which chief monk of Xiankong Temple you were when you were alive, but you cultivated the Vajra body. After you passed away, you came here to guard the ghost river. Buddha arranged a good job for you, but you are not ashamed to talk about mercy. Ksitigarbha looked slightly serious and looked at him quietly. After a long time, he said, I first opened the wisdom eye, and now I have the heavenly eye. You are right. I am the second chief monk of Xiankong Temple. The first chief monk of Xiankong Temple was Buddha, and he was the second chief monk, which meant he was Buddha's eldest disciple. From the perspective of the secular world and the cultivation world, he was the chief Buddha of Xiankong Temple. Ning-Ke heard him admit it and thought that it was no wonder he had such a powerful state. He said sarcastically, You are indeed a fake bodhisattva. Ksitigarbha said, Buddha was a secular prince when he was alive, and he became Buddha after nirvana. I was the chief monk of Xiankong Temple when I was alive, and I became a bodhisattva after nirvana. Why can't I? Ning-Ke was speechless and thought that it was true. Whether it was the Buddha's or the bodhisattva position, it was the Buddhism sect's own business, and they were all positions assigned by Buddha. Buddha made this monk Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, so he was Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Even if Ning-Ke saw through his previous life, what difference would it make? He had such a strong reaction because he felt that his feelings had been cheated. He was not a Buddhist, but he still admired Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva very much. But he did not expect, You were the chief monk of Xiankong Temple when you were alive, so you naturally know the miserable world under the mountain. You swore not to become a Buddha until hell was empty. That is the real hell. You didn't even empty the hell in the human world, and that hell was even created by Buddha and you. How can you have the face to say these words? Ning-Ke stared at Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva on the back of the skeletal elephant and said, My senior brother is now leading millions of hungry ghosts to break the hell you left behind. He wants to bring those hungry ghosts that have been suppressed by you for countless generations back to the human world. You swore not to become a Buddha until hell was empty. Even if someone wants to become a Buddha, it should be my senior brother. It's none of your business. After a while, the skeletal elephant sent the vermilion bird tied to its nose to its back. Ksitigarbha reached out and took the vermilion bird. He looked at Ning-Ke who was standing at the bow of the boat and said calmly, Your bird is in my hands. It's none of your business. Ksitigarbha's words were Buddhist words, and his words were sharp. Just like the monks in the human world, they liked to solve or create differences by debating. Unfortunately, he was talking about Ning-Ke today. Ning-Ke didn't understand anything from his words. Instead, he was extremely angry. After that night in the Divine Hall of Light, he hated to hear anything related to birds, not to mention that his bird was in Ksitigarbha's hands. He was furious. His psyche moved, and the vermilion bird in Ksitigarbha's hand suddenly turned into a ball of fire, spreading to all sides of the river, and then disappeared. The next moment, the vermilion bird returned to the body of the iron cutlass, chirping in pain. It closed its eyes and covered its feathers to recuperate. The vermilion bird was a killing talisman of the god-stunning array. It was completely controlled by Ning Kei's psyche. Even Xitigarbha couldn't really control it. At first, he wanted to pretend to let the skeletal elephant catch the vermilion bird. When the battle started, he would let the vermilion bird attack and see if he could gain some advantages. Now he took back the vermilion bird because Xitigarbha's state was too high, and the vermilion bird's sneak attack would be meaningless. More importantly, he couldn't bear to let his bird continue to be held by Xitigarbha, even for a moment. Xitigarbha, eat my rod. If he wanted to play, he had to play the whole set. Ning Kei swept from the bow to the side and came to the front of the skeletal elephant. He held the iron cutlass with both hands, as if he was carrying an iron rod, and smashed it at Xitigarbha's head. The skeletal elephant roared, and the river suddenly became chaotic. Xitigarbha looked at Ning Kei in the air quietly. His left hand on his knee had formed a wishful gesture, and the 9-ringed golden staff in his right hand faded and turned into a monk's staff. Xitigarbha had made a great wish to save all living beings in the 6 realms of samsara. Therefore, he often appeared in the 6 realms with different dharma images and different magic weapons. They were called the 6 Xitigarbha. At this time, sitting on the skeletal elephant was the treasure seal Xitigarbha. The treasure seal Xitigarbha was specialized in saving animals. Ning Kei had been cultivating Buddhism for countless years, so he knew the reason. Seeing the treasure seal Xitigarbha, he was even more furious. He poured the Great Spirit and Hautian Divine Light into the iron cutlass and violently chopped it down. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 984. Xitigarbha Bodhisattva's expression did not change. He raised his 9-ringed staff and the river flowed faster at the tip of the staff, creating a dense and crisp sound. He reached above the skeletal elephant and hit Ning Kei's cutlass. There was a loud bang. The clear river rolled up countless whirlpools and the powerful force spread around. Countless skeletons covered their non-existent ears and countless wandering souls hid their heads in their arms, not daring to listen. A huge force came from the front of the iron cutlass. Ning Kei felt as if he had hit a mountain. He could not move his opponent at all and his wrist was about to be broken by the recoil. Xitigarbha Bodhisattva was the 2nd chief monk of the Xiankong temple. His Vajra body had long been cultivated to the peak. After his death, the power of Buddha was even stronger. He could not even move the chief monk of the human world, let alone this one. Ning Kei stepped on the head of the skeletal elephant with his right foot and raised his cutlass to strike again. But his body had already leaned back and was ready to retreat with the help of the water. However, at this moment, the skeletal elephant's trunk attacked like a ghost and tightly wrapped around his waist. The elephant's trunk was so strong that he could not break free and fell into the same situation as the vermilion bird. Before he could react, the wishful seal in Xitigarbha Bodhisattva's left hand had already hit his chest. There was infinite power of Buddha in the seal that could suppress all evil spirits in the animal way. Ning Kei spat out blood and felt the endless force coming from his chest. He knew that if he could not get rid of it, he would be killed by the seal. With a roar, the Great Spirit in his abdomen suddenly broke out. The iron cutlass fell down and heavily hit the trunk of the skeletal elephant. The moment the trunk was loosened, Ning Kei turned into a light smoke and escaped back to the sunken ship. He fell on the bow and spat out blood again. He almost fell down. Xitigarbha Bodhisattva looked at him quietly and the 9-ringed staff in his right hand made a soft sound in the river. Ning Kei wiped his face with his hand and the blood was quickly washed away by the river water. He looked at Xitigarbha Bodhisattva on the skeletal elephant and his expression became extremely solemn. He knew that Xitigarbha Bodhisattva was strong, but he did not expect it to be so strong. It was okay that he could not cut it, but the skeletal elephant also had such terrifying power that the seal could not be avoided. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva looked at him and said mercifully, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha." Ninkei didn't even think and said without hesitation, "Okay." Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was slightly surprised, but the wraith skeletons at the bottom of the river laughed proudly. These wraith skeletons had no flesh on their faces, so they naturally had no expression. Their laughter was the sound of teeth chattering, which sounded very eerie. With a clang, Ninkei really sheathed the iron cutlass. Then, he took out the iron bow and stood at the bow of the boat. The dark iron arrow remained motionless in the river, pointing straight at the skeletal elephant. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva frowned slightly and chanted the name of Buddha. The iron arrow on the bowstring was the primordial 13 arrows. The primordial 13 arrows had killed countless powerhouses in the human world and set off countless bloody storms. They were known as the weapons of Asura. Putting down the butcher's knife and becoming a Buddha immediately, Ninkei raised the iron arrow to see if he could kill Buddha. A few years ago in the White Tower Temple, he failed to shoot through the chief monk of scripture. But now his state was higher, and he had Sangsang's divine power in his body. He believed that this iron arrow could definitely kill the monk on the bone elephant. A white turbulence appeared at the bow of the boat, driving the river to spin at a high speed. The iron arrow on the bowstring suddenly disappeared, and the next moment, it came to the front of the skeletal elephant. At this time, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva had just uttered the name of Buddha. A light sound, like an embroidery needle falling on a stone slab, or like the music of the beginning of a banquet, was heard. The water above the skeletal elephant suddenly became chaotic, and the light became a little dim. When the river became clear again, the iron arrow reappeared. The iron arrow did not shoot through Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, not even through his kasaya. Because the iron arrow did not even reach the front of the Bodhisattva, but was nailed to an umbrella. It looked like an ordinary umbrella, with countless strings of diamond hanging on the edge, slowly rotating in the river. The handle of the umbrella was held in Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's hand, and the Bodhisattva's other hand had already changed the mudra. Ninkei was shocked speechless. He wondered what material the umbrella was made of, and how could it catch the primordial 13 arrows shot by him with Haotian's divine power. Its strength was almost as strong as the big black umbrella. An umbrella with a rope hanging was a pagoda, and this umbrella was the legendary Vajra pagoda. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva held the Vajra pagoda in his right hand and the fearless seal in his left. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva controlled the 6 realms and had the 6 Dharma images. Iron knives could not cut him, iron arrows could not pierce him, he was as calm and unmoving as the earth, and his thoughts were as deep as a secret chamber. He was invincible. Ninkei was shocked speechless, but he was not discouraged. He drew out the iron cutlass again and slashed twice at the direction of the skeletal elephant. The blades cut the water at the bottom of the river and turned into 2 extremely powerful and sharp talismans. This was his most powerful technique, the Divine Talisman. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's Dharma idol changed again. He held the precious pearl in his left hand and formed the sweet dew mudra in his right hand, transforming into the precious pearl tunnel. It was specialized in helping hungry ghosts and could suppress all intents, including talisman intents. 2 extremely powerful symbol intents even cut apart the flowing river water, leaving behind 2 extremely clear spaces in the water. However, when they arrived in front of the bone elephant, they were stopped by that precious bead, unable to advance an inch. Even the formless talisman intent could be blocked by a tangible magic tool. What exactly was this precious pearl? How could the Buddhism sect have so many treasures? How powerful was Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva? Ninkei's most powerful technique was easily resolved by Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. At this moment, he finally felt uneasy and even a little desperate. At this moment, a voice rang in his heart. Sangsang's voice was a little weak but very calm. "Let me do it." Ning Ke remembered that summer in Chang'an many years ago. After a rainstorm, he finally learned talisman Taoism. Therefore, no matter what Sang Sang did, he would snatch it. His voice kept ringing in the old brush pen shop. Let me do it. Later, Sang Sang grew up and became Haotian. She was so weak that she could die at any time, but she was still much more powerful than him. Now it was her turn to say this. Standing in the slightly cold river, Ning Ke felt warmth in his heart. He was calm and happy, but he was inevitably a little worried because she was too weak now. Can you hold on? Maybe I can. I might sleep for a long time after this. Then, be careful. Ning Ke closed his eyes. The next moment, he found that he could no longer control his body. Sang Sang's consciousness took over, and he could only watch quietly. It was a strange and helpless feeling. In the battle with Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva later, no matter what danger Sang Sang encountered, he could only watch like this. Seeing Ning Ke standing at the bow of the boat with his eyes closed, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's expression gradually became serious. He vaguely sensed that something he did not want to see was happening. The Vajra banner was hit by the river and clanked. The diamonds hanging on the umbrella were gradually washed by the water and became countless human skulls in the white forest. The fearless mudra on Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's right hand had also dispersed. His fingertips gently rose in the river and then fell like a flower, forming another mudra to spread mercy to the world. Countless evil ghosts, and skeletons at the bottom of the river felt the change of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. They all knelt on the ground and spread their awareness to worship him, devoutly chanting. Ning Ke opened his eyes. His eyelashes drew thin lines in the river. But in the blink of an eye, the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva he saw was different from the previous one. The Vajra banner in Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's left hand had become the banner of human skulls. The fearless mudra in Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's right hand had formed the sweet dew mudra, which was Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's specialty to save all living beings in hell. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva sensed the change in Ning Ke and reacted without hesitation. He turned into the most merciful, cruel, and powerful Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Ning Ke looked at Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva and said expressionlessly, "Die, or get out of the way." Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva knew that Ning Ke was no longer Ning Quebec. It was Haotian who spoke. He could not help but be moved. Hell was disturbed. Thousands of ghosts and skeletons in the river looked confused and their chanting was slightly chaotic. Soon, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva calmed down. Hell naturally calmed down. The chanting in the river became orderly again. He looked at Ning Ke standing at the bow of the boat and said with emotion, "Unity of heaven and man who is heaven." This was not a debate, but a real emotion. Ksitigarbha felt that Haotian was no longer here. Die, or get out of the way. A cultivator would appear to be strong and confident when he said such words. But Haotian would not say such words. She would not say anything. She would directly kill the other party, even if the other party was Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. This only proved that Haotian had become very weak. The chanting was loud and the light of Buddha filled the air. It penetrated Ning Ke's clothes and triggered the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession in Sang Sang's soul. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and scattered into the river. The blood contained Haotian's divine flame and was extremely hot. The river was boiling and turned into countless tiny bubbles, like pearls floating on his face. His face was still expressionless, or rather, Sang Sang still had no expression. Because she was hurt in her heart and he was hurt in his body. She would not care about this. Sang Sang did not talk to Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. She took out the iron bow and shot an arrow. It looked simple, but compared with Ning Ke's arrow, it was countless times more powerful. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva looked compassionate. The tantra in his hand felt it. Countless pale human heads hanging on the umbrella suddenly opened their mouths at the same time and began to scream. Tens of thousands of white skulls screamed at the same time. The river in front of the skeletal elephant seemed to produce an invisible barrier. No matter how powerful the iron arrow was, even if it was shot by Haotian, it still could not pass through the barrier. There was a soft sound. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva looked down at his chest and found a dark arrow sticking out. It was stained with several drops of golden blood and several strands of golden thread on the kasaya. Even the strongest tantra, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, could not block this iron arrow. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's face showed pain and confusion because he did not know how the iron arrow came about. The will of heaven was unpredictable. No, the will of heaven was unpredictable. The arrow shot by Haotian was also unpredictable. Just as the iron arrow shot through Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, Sang Sang left the bow of the boat. Like real water, she walked freely in the current and instantly came to the skeletal elephant. The tens of thousands of skulls on the tundra were still screaming. Ning Kei's face was bleeding black blood, but his eyes were still calm or indifferent. He landed on the head of the skeletal elephant without fear. He came to the front of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. Haotian came to the front of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. I really admire myself for being so muddle-headed. Thank you, dear starfish, for helping me to change the chapter names. There were too many typos in the first few chapters, which is also the reason why I was muddle-headed. I apologize to everyone. I have to leave at 5 a.m. tomorrow, so I need to pack my luggage and do some preparations today. I'll write another chapter. I'll write as many as I can. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chijien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 985. Tantua Ksitigarbha was the most powerful Ksitigarbha. The pennant of human skulls in his hand was the most powerful Ksitigarbha in hell. The sweet dew seal contained infinite mercy, which hurt the poison Sang Sang. Ning Kei's body was torn by the countless skulls on the Tantua. He was wounded everywhere, and his clothes were torn and bleeding. Countless resentful souls were summoned by the sutra and flowed to him along the river, desperately drilling into his wounds. Although they were purified by the divine light contained in his blood as soon as they touched his blood, the wounds remained and became more and more serious. The edges of the wounds gradually turned gray. His eyes were also bleeding, but they were still so calm, without any fear or pain. It seemed that he did not even have any thoughts. He was extremely ruthless and cold. Because the eyes were emotions, Sang Sang's emotions. The bone elephant was dozens of feet high and had a large head. Sang Sang landed on its head as if she had landed in a very spacious house, which made her figure look so small. Sang Sang walked to the back of the elephant, getting closer and closer to Ksitigarbha. The bone elephant roared angrily, and its trunk broke out of the river and lashed at her like a whip. Ning Kei's initial thought was right. There were no bones in the elephant's trunk, even the elephants in the Styx River in hell did not have bones. The elephant had a long trunk made of white bones because it could not forget its previous life after coming to Buddha's nirvana. So it picked up countless broken bones from the mud at the bottom of the river and made a trunk for itself. The broken bones in the elephant's trunk were all human bones. The bone elephant had been listening to sutras in the Styx River for tens of thousands of years and had already refined these human bones into its own magic weapon. Its Buddha's power was boundless, so it could easily tie up Vermilion Bird and Ning Quebec. Even if they were at the peak of knowing destiny state, they could not break free. In the roar, the bone trunk was like a white shadow, lashing at Sang Sang. It was as powerful as the Vajra in Buddha's hand. The river was turbulent. Once one was lashed, he would definitely die and his soul would be scattered. Countless skeletons and resentful souls in the river had been killed by the trunk of the bone elephant. Seeing this scene, they instinctively felt fear and did not dare to continue watching. Sang Sang did not look either. It was as if she did not know that the bone elephant was attacking her and that the trunk made of human bones was about to fall on her body. She continued to move forward expressionlessly. She took a step forward and stepped on the elephant's trunk. This stomp seemed simple, but in fact, it was mysterious beyond words. It was as if the bone elephant had extended its nose there, waiting for her to step on it. A miserable howl resounded through the nether river. The bone elephant was in great pain. It shook its head desperately and used all its strength to pull its trunk out of Song Song's feet. Half of the trunk was broken and the white bones flew everywhere. Sang Sang walked to the front of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva and held the hilt of the iron knife. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva looked at her quietly. The pennant of human skulls in his hands suddenly became hundreds of times bigger. It covered the entire world at the bottom of the river and then fell on her head. The clear river water became dark and gloomy again, as if night had come. Countless sharp and unpleasant screeches resounded in the night, and countless skulls were roaring angrily. Each skull represented a follower that Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva had subdued. The countless skulls on the banner of human skulls represented the consciousness of countless followers, as well as their unwillingness. More wounds appeared on Ning Kei's body, and his eardrums ruptured instantly. If he had not mastered the Great Spirit and had a strong body like the powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine, he would have been torn into pieces by the screeches. The real terrible damage was not on his body, but on his heart. His heart suddenly beat faster like a rainstorm. It beat thousands of times every breath, and it could break at any time. Ning Kei was very conscious. He was in great pain and fear. His survival instinct made him want to leave the horrible pennant of human skulls and return to the sunken ship, away from the bone elephant. But he could not do it. It was Sang Sang who controlled his body now. Sang Sang did not care what kind of damage this body was suffering, nor did she care that this body could be destroyed at any time. Her eyes were still cold and calm. She looked at the pennant of human skulls in Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's hand and shouted, so noisy. Her shout was like thunder, echoing in the dark river bottom and suppressing the chanting of countless resentful souls. The countless skulls hanging on the edge of the pennant of human skulls were shocked and instantly became quiet. After a while, these skulls came to their senses and screamed even more angrily. Suddenly, there were countless tiny cracking sounds on the pennant of human skulls. Countless skulls were shaken into extremely fine bone powder, which was carried away by the river and could no longer make any sound. These skulls were shattered by their own screeches. Sang Sang said that these skulls were too noisy. Since they dared to disobey her and continued to make noise, they would die. This was the will of Haotian. Sang Sang pulled out the iron cutlass and slashed at Ksitigarbha. With a swish, the blade cut the Kasaya on Ksitigarbha and cut off countless golden threads. It cut the Dharmakaya of Ksitigarbha to death, but only left a slight cut. Golden blood slowly oozed out, but did not flow down. Sang Sang was not happy, so Ning Kei frowned. She reached out her right hand and put it on Ksitigarbha's chest. She pulled out the iron arrow from Ksitigarbha's back with an unpredictable and magical method. Looking at the golden blood on the iron arrow, Sang Sang was a little disgusted. She took out the iron bow and put an arrow on it. She aimed the dark and sharp arrowhead at Ksitigarbha's eyebrows and even touched it. An aura spread around and shrouded the skeletal elephant. The pennant of human skulls was broken and drifted away with the river, but it did not drift away, as if there was an invisible barrier blocking it. Sang Sang opened her world, the pennant of human skulls, the skeletal elephant, and Ksitigarbha on the back of the elephant were all in her world. No one could escape and no one could resist her will. She aimed the iron arrow at Ksitigarbha's eyebrows, but Ksitigarbha failed to dodge. Ksitigarbha held the front end of the iron arrow with his left hand. Sang Sang quietly looked at him under the arrow, and a divine thought fell into the iron arrow. Ksitigarbha looked solemn and chanted the name of Buddha. Sang Sang loosened her fingers, and the iron arrow left the bowstring. The arrow did not move. Ksitigarbha held the shaft of the iron arrow, and the golden light in his left hand shone brightly. The skeletal elephant let out a cry and slowly sank. The bone of its right forelimb was broken from the middle. It was so quiet between Sang Sang and Xitigarbha, as if the iron arrow had not been shot. In fact, the power of the iron arrow had been fully released. Sang Sang put away the bow, held the iron arrow in her right hand, and sent it forward again. She turned her divine thought into the bow and arrow. There was a light puff. Xitigarbha's eyebrows finally broke, and a drop of golden blood oozed out, like a mole. The mole formed by the golden blood floated away from the Xitigarbha's eyebrows, and slowly but unstoppably floated forward in the river. Finally, it fell on Ning Kei's eyebrows and Song Song's heart. The golden blood touched Ning Kei's body, and the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession took effect. Ning Kei spat out a mouthful of blood in pain, but Sang Sang was still unmoved. She held the iron arrow in her hand and continued to send it forward. More golden blood gushed out of Xitigarbha's eyebrows, and his injury became more and more serious. At the same time, the light of Buddha in the golden blood made Ning Kei feel more and more pain. Who would die first? Xitigarbha looked at Ning Kei, who was covered in blood, and Haotian in his body. He said with a merciful expression, "Buddha will be happy to exchange his broken body for Haotian's death." Sang Sang was expressionless. She took another step forward, and the iron arrow went deeper. Xitigarbha could no longer maintain his calm and merciful expression. His face was full of fear and confusion. He roared and released the sweet dew madra with his right hand, which was glowing with golden light, and hit Ning Kei's chest with his palm. Sang Sang ignored him and continued to take another step forward. The iron arrow in her hand pierced deeply into Xitigarbha's eyebrows. Golden Buddha's blood splashed everywhere, and the Buddha's power suddenly dispersed. Before dying, Xitigarbha's eyes were a little confused, because he couldn't understand why she dared to bet her life with him, the most noble Haotian, who had endless life. He didn't know that Sang Sang and Ning Kei were originally going to bet their lives with Buddha. The skeletal elephant retreated to the depths of the dark river. Its right forelimb was broken, and it walked very slowly. As it retreated, it kept shaking the remaining half of its nose, which seemed to be in great pain. Xitigarbha sat on the back of the skeletal elephant with his eyes closed. Looking at this scene, the wraiths and skeletons at the bottom of the river whispered, as if they couldn't believe what they saw. When they looked at the sunken ship, they became very quiet. Ning Kei's body was shaken back to the sunken ship by Xitigarbha's last palm. Looking at the skeletal elephant disappearing into the darkness, he suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and fell on the ship. Sang Sang gave up the control of this body. Ning Kei opened his eyes and asked worriedly, "Is he okay?" Sang Sang said, if he didn't retreat, he might be okay. But he did. Ning Kei had been watching the battle, and he knew very well that Sang Sang was very weak now. If Xitigarbha could maintain his state of mind, he might not lose, and even both of them might be injured. Looking at the direction where the skeletal elephant disappeared, he sighed and said, "It is said that Xitigarbha is merciful and resolute. I didn't expect that he would be a coward who was afraid of death in the end. He is indeed a fake bodhisattva." The sunken ship rose, and the river separated to make a road, revealing the sky above the river. The rain clouds had dispersed, and the water in the ship flowed cleanly between the waterways. The water walls on both sides were very clear, and no fish could be seen. But the wraiths with vague faces and countless skeletons could be seen. Those wraiths were slightly more intelligent, but they didn't dare to do anything. They just looked at them in confusion and fear, while the skeletons instinctively stretched out their bone hands, trying to stop the people on the ship. Sang Sang controlled the body for a while, and Ning Kei's consciousness became more and more intertwined with hers. Looking at those stretched out bone hands, he casually waved his sleeves, and a clear light fell, and the bone hands were instantly purified. No more skeletons dared to approach the water wall. The wraiths floated in the water, and the ship sailed between the water walls. He remembered the scene when he crossed the river with Sang Sang. It was not as beautiful, but it was very strange. The ship reached the other side and ran aground on the mudflat. Ning Ke carried Song Song's body on his back, and walked to the woods in the east with the iron cutlass. When he came to the woods, he looked back at the river that was as calm as a mirror. He had a lot of fear, but also a lot of pride. Ksitigarbha was dead, who could stop him? At this moment, the light of Buddha gradually shone in the dark sky west of the river, and the sound of chanting came from the hundreds of miles of redwood forest that had been leveled by him with talisman. He knew that countless Buddhas from the Nirvana world had come again. He shouted to that side, "Come and chase me across the river if you can." The title of this chapter is so simple that I feel embarrassed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 986. At the end of last month and a few days ago, I had reported in advance that I will be returning to Hubei to settle some personal matters. Some of the more important matters are more important than work, and the updates will definitely slow down. I will try my best to keep updating. When I am free, I will try my best to write 2 chapters. If I can write 3 chapters, I will definitely keep the manuscript. I will leave at around 5 a.m. If everything goes smoothly, I should be able to reach home at around 4 p.m. After a day of traveling, I will naturally be tired. I will try my best to write 1 chapter first. In the next 10 days or so, it will be more common to write 1 chapter at night. This will be a return to 1 chapter. It might be slightly harder for me, but I can handle it. I have experience writing 200,000 words. Everyone, please encourage, be tolerant, be more understanding, work together, and return to 1. It will still be the same sentence. This month, I hope that everyone can read happily and vote easily. I am still first in the monthly votes rankings now. I hope that I will be first in the end. This is also a return to 1. There should not be any more individual chapters in the next few days. I should hurry up and shout a few more times. Those bad guys behind are catching up. There are only a few tens of votes left. Everyone, hurry up and vote. Save me. My throat is broken. Monthly votes. Why do I need a bicycle? Thank you. To be continued. If you like this novel, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 987. I want to cross the river. Who will carry me? Let me carry you. Ning Ke hummed a tune and walked to the woods by the river with his sister on his back. He was so happy that he was crazy. After crossing the hurdle of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, the pressure that he had accumulated these days was naturally released wildly. There were still countless Buddhas looking for him and Sang Sang in the field west of the river. They wanted to kill him and Sang Sang, but he believed that those Buddhas could not cross the river because there were countless resentful souls and skeletons in the river. Those skeletons were not smart, but they were powerful. Without the command of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, they could not distinguish between friend and foe and would not let go of those Buddhas. It should be known that the light of Buddha could suppress ghosts and was also an excellent nourishment for ghosts. Ning Ke and Sang Sang could purify with Haotian's divine light, but those Buddhas could not. When they reached the woods, the song suddenly stopped. Ning Ke knelt down in the moss-covered ground with a thud. He held the wetland with both hands and kept vomiting blood. His face turned pale because of the pain. Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva was not easy to kill. It was not until then that he found that his body was seriously injured, like a battlefield after a bloody battle. There were wounds and blood everywhere, and it was very difficult to find an intact bone. As for the psyche power in his sense of perception, it was even more chaotic. He turned around with difficulty and sat down against a redwood tree. He panted hard and held Sang Sang in his arms. He said, "I felt a little unreliable just now. You were too fierce when you fought." Sang Sang said in his heart, "What do you think? This is my body. No matter what, you should take care of it." Ning Ke thought of the bloody battle between her and Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. She did not even blink when Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's powerful pennant of human skulls ruined her body. Sang Sang said, "That's why I should take care of it." Ning Ke said angrily, "You can only win by risking your life. Do you think I don't know that? I just want you to say something nice. We have become one. Why can't you say something intimate?" He meant something else when he said, "become one." Sang Sang said, "Even if I break your body, what can I do?" Ning Ke was furious. He turned her over and spanked her buttocks twice. He scolded, "If there's a next time, I won't go easy on your body." Sang Sang seemed to be a little tired and no longer paid attention to him. The quarrel became a quarrel between the two of them. Naturally, it was boring. He leaned against the tree trunk and looked at the scenery on the other side of the river to kill time. Logically speaking, he should be in a hurry to meditate to heal his injuries and restore his psyche power, but he did nothing. As time passed, his injuries naturally healed. How Tian had merged with him. In terms of life recovery, who could be better than him? Ning Ke stood up and was about to leave with Sang Sang on his back. Suddenly, he saw many Buddha lights in the redwood forest on the other side of the river, and then he heard the chanting of scriptures. Every golden light was a Buddha, and it was a Buddha that they had met and injured. Naturally, the number of Buddhas in the redwood forest was far more than what he saw. Ning Ke was not in a hurry, thinking that these Buddhas could not cross the river. He smiled and looked at the other side of the river, and even waved to the Buddha at the front. The Buddha was an acquaintance. When he and Sang Sang went to the opera in Chaoyang City, he always bought tickets from this Buddha. Until now, he still did not know who this Buddha was. The dark sky gradually brightened, the riverbank gradually brightened, the Buddha lights gradually brightened, and the chanting of scriptures gradually became solemn. For a moment, no one knew how many Buddhas came to the Styx River and looked at the other side in silence. Ning Ke's expression became solemn. Even with his eyesight, he could not count how many Buddhas there were. What shocked him even more was that those Buddhas actually began to walk into the Styx River. Thousands, tens of thousands, or even more Buddhas bypassed the fallen redwood trees, walked across the soft riverbank, and silently walked into the clear river. It was dark, as if an army was crossing the river. There were more resentful spirits and skeletons in the depths of the Styx River. They sensed the Buddha lights and aura on these Buddhas, but did not sense the coercion of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. After a moment of hesitation, they finally failed to suppress their instinctive love for light and their greed for the pure aura of Buddha. The clear river water turned black at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the calm surface of the river suddenly became extremely turbulent. Some Buddhas with low cultivation were directly swept away by the river water and became food for the resentful spirits, while the Buddhas with high cultivation were surrounded by dozens or even hundreds of resentful spirits, constantly devouring them. The scene was extremely terrifying. What puzzled Ning Ke was that none of the Buddhas made a sound during the whole process. They silently entered the water, silently were swept away, silently were devoured, and silently turned into countless golden light fragments. They even stopped chanting the Buddhist scriptures that had a strong suppressive effect on resentful spirits and wild ghosts, as if they were deliberately courting death. Dozens of Buddhas with profound dharma did the same. If they used their means, they could save the Buddhas who were sinking into hell, not to mention to protect themselves. But they did nothing. They just put their palms together and silently walked into the depths of the Styx River. Chapter 988. A few days later, Ning Ke carried Sang Sang to a place dozens of miles away from the snow mountain. The fields here were covered with green grass and there were thousands of lakes and ponds. The paths between the ponds were like lines. There were trees and willows beside each pond. There were flowers and lotuses on the ponds. The lotuses were white and red, as if they were dyed with blood. The green leaves were like skirts, and the stems were golden. It was extremely beautiful. There were countless golden lights above the thousands of ponds, rising from everything. The lotuses, branches, leaves, willows, stones, and even the ponds were all emitting golden light. It was the light of Buddha. The light of Buddha was too bright and the scene was too beautiful. Ninkei lowered the big black umbrella, but he could not avoid the ubiquitous light. He squinted his eyes. Because of Song Song's poisoning, his chest and abdomen were full of disgust, and there was sweetness in his throat from time to time, which was a sign of vomiting blood. The indescribably beautiful and holy world was the real Buddha land. He was very sure that Buddha lived in this world, but he did not know where he was. He carried Sang Sang on his back and searched among the ponds. He stepped on the narrow mud path between the ponds, pushed aside the willow branches in front of him, and looked back and forth between the lotuses, lakes, and stones, looking extremely patient. Sang Sang kept silent and watched him search aimlessly for a long time. Finally, she could not help but ask, "Do you know where Buddha is?" Ninkei said, "I don't know." Sang Sang said, "Then what's the point of looking around like this?" Ninkei said, "Buddha will wake up as long as I see him. So looking is searching." Seeing Buddha was enough. He walked through the golden ponds with Sang Sang on his back. He looked at the lotuses on the ponds, the clear water in the ponds, the mud at the bottom, the lotus roots in the mud, the stones on the banks of the ponds, the willows among the stones, and the golden cicadas on the willows. He rarely blinked because he did not dare to miss anything. One day, hearing the croaking sounds coming from the lotus field, he thought for a moment and untied Song Song's body. Then, he jumped into the water, swam to the depths of the lotus field, and caught a fat frog. He held the frog in front of his eyes and stared at it for a long time. The frog innocently opened its round eyes and stared back at him. The man and the frog stared at each other for a long time. In the end, Ninkei's eyes began to ache and he silently shed tears. Sang Sang mocked him in his heart, "Even if you think what you did was stupid, why do you have to cry?" Ninkei explained angrily, "My eyes are sore." Sang Sang said, "It's your fault for staring at me for so long." Ninkei said, "I've seen so many flowers and willows without any reaction." After thinking about it, the frog in the pond is most likely to be the Buddha. Of course, I have to look at it more. Sang Sang was a little confused and asked, "How could Buddha be a frog?" Ninkei said seriously, "According to the Buddhist scriptures, Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva also confirmed that Buddha was a prince of a small country in the secular world, so it is natural that he could become a frog." Sang Sang was even more puzzled and asked, "What's the relationship between the frog and the prince?" Ninkei said, "The Frog Prince. Haven't you heard of such a famous story?" Sang Sang remembered and said, "Is it the fairy tale you told me when I was young?" Ninkei nodded and said, "Isn't the prince turning into a frog some kind of hint?" Sang Sang said, "Then you still have to kiss it." Ninkei was so focused on finding Buddha that he didn't hear the sarcasm in her words. After hesitating for a while, he really raised the frog in front of his eyes and kissed it. The frog didn't change at all, but it looked a little aggrieved. Ninkei wiped his mouth and spat a lot of saliva into the pond. He said, "It seems that it is not this one." Sang Sang said, "There are at least tens of thousands of frogs here." Ninkei looked at the thousands of golden ponds and listened to the cicadas in the willow trees and the frogs in the lotus fields. He thought that there might be more than tens of thousands of frogs. Not to mention the golden cicadas in the willow trees, that was Third Sister's livelihood. If he had to kiss all these frogs, how swollen would his mouth be? What if he kissed a toad? He was not a swan. After searching for several days, he still found nothing. According to his calculation, those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas all over the mountains and fields should be catching up soon. He became a little anxious. The golden ponds occupied a large field, and in the middle was the towering snow mountain. The mountain peak had been covered by ice and snow for many years. The thick layer of snow fell from the peak to the foot of the mountain, and the original color of the cliff could not be seen at all. Trickles of water flowed down from the snow and moistened the field. That was how the thousands of ponds came to be. Under the dark sky, the snow-white mountain was surrounded by thousands of golden ponds, which looked extremely spectacular and beautiful. One day, Ning-Ke found the foot of the mountain and forgot what he had said when he looked up. He remembered that the Prajna peak where the Xiankong temple was located was transformed by the body of Buddha left in the human world. Buddha seemed to like to compare himself with a mountain, so was it possible that the snow mountain was Buddha? The golden ponds and golden lotus branches in the field, as well as other things, all emitted the light of Buddha. Was it because of the snow water? After thinking for a while, he denied his own inference. The snow mountain could be seen from hundreds of miles away. These days, he occasionally looked at the snow mountain in the golden ponds, but the snow mountain never moved. Naturally, it was not Buddha. "Hey, if you are Buddha, answer me." Ning-Ke looked at the snow mountain and shouted. The snow mountain was silent, and only his voice kept echoing and lingering. He laughed at himself, turned around, and walked towards the next pond. However, he did not go far before he suddenly stopped. A voice sounded behind him. It was not the echo of the snow mountain, because the voice was very loud and roaring. It came from a very high place, like a thunder falling from the sky. Ning-Ke turned to look at the snow mountain. His face suddenly became pale and his body became stiff. The voice came from the top of the snow mountain. It was the sound of avalanche. The snow layer kept collapsing, and countless snowflakes fell. The snow line at the front accumulated higher and higher, like a huge wave. The friction between the snow layer and the cliff made a terrible sound like thunder. The field began to shake violently, as if there was an earthquake. The water in the golden ponds trembled and then began to jump with the golden light of Buddha, like a goddess dancing. The wind roared, and the willows beside the ponds bent down. The lotus leaves in the ponds fluttered, and the lotuses bloomed more vigorously. The frogs and golden cicadas kept chirping, as if they were ready to welcome the birth of a great being. The avalanche was still going on. Ning-Ke stood on the trembling field, looking at the peak that gradually revealed its true appearance and the black cliff covered with snow. He suddenly thought of the highest peak by the hot sea in the north of the human world. He thought that the snow mountain was both the end and the beginning, and vaguely understood something. His face became paler and his body stiffer. He held the hilt tightly in his right hand and put his left hand in front of his chest, communicating with Sang-Sang in his body, waiting for the final judgment. The avalanche lasted for a very long time before it gradually quieted down. Under the dark sky, the snow mountain was no longer what it used to be. There was not much snow left in the black rocks, and the outline of the snow mountain could be vaguely seen. If the snow mountain was a statue, it would naturally have an outline. After the avalanche, Buddha finally showed his true body. He sat cross-legged between heaven and earth, and the top of the snow mountain was the Buddha's face. The lines were very rough and blurred, giving people a feeling that it was fake. Today's update is 2,000 words. I have to write tomorrow's. I can't write tomorrow. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 989. After the snow fell, the mountain was still the same mountain. It looked no different from any mountain in the human world or in this world. The exposed black cliff stones were nothing special. They were either rough or smooth, without luster or aura of life. They were silent, cliff stones. Ning Ke stood in front of the mountain with Sang Sang on his back and looked at the true appearance of the mountain for a long time. It was still a mountain until the gold on the golden pond was blown into countless pieces by the night wind. Did Buddha wake up? Was Buddha alive or dead? He was waiting for the answer but did not know what it was, which made him very nervous and confused. Did we win the bet? It seems not. Why? Ning Ke was very disappointed and angry. He sat on the ground and kept kicking his legs like a wronged child or a wronged frog, kicking the snow in front of him everywhere. Sang Sang said calmly, because Buddha is Buddha, not a cat. Hearing this, Ning Ke was silent for a long time. He understood that from the very beginning, his and Sang Sang's conjecture was different from the truth. The ideal experiment about the cat required a box and a delicate poisoning device. There was no reason for Buddha to trap himself in that situation. Then what was nirvana? Nirvana was still a superposition state of quantum, but it had nothing to do with life and death. It was only related to the position. When you observed, it suddenly appeared there or here. Buddha did not design the device that might poison himself, but he could design other ways to make Haotian not find him. We still won. Ning Ke stood up and looked at the mountain in front of him. He said, "Yes, Buddha is here. This mountain is Buddha. Just destroy it." Sang Sang said, "No, Buddha is in all living beings." Ning Ke understood what she meant. Observation was confirmation. Buddha was not a quantum that purely depended on observation to determine its property. He had self-consciousness, so he could appear anywhere. In the world of chessboard, all living beings became Buddha, which was the embodiment of this state. Sang Sang was right. The woman selling vegetables could be Buddha, the golden pond could be Buddha, the willow leaves in the pond could be Buddha, and even the frog Ning Ke kissed a few days ago could be Buddha. This snow mountain was also the Buddha, and it should be the central coordinate of the Buddha in the chessboard world. Only in this way, the Buddha in the superposition state could ensure his own existence. However, it was useless to destroy the snow mountain, because the Buddha could appear in countless places and move faster than light. No one could really find him, and naturally, no one could kill him. Ning Ke said, "When we came to the Far East, the world began to tremble. Countless Buddhas became nervous and afraid, which proved that this snow mountain was very important to the Buddha." At this moment, there were vibrations coming from the periphery of the golden pond. Countless Buddhas came from the wilderness. Among them were several Mahabodhisattvas who had transformed when they crossed the underworld river. Sensing the changes in the snow mountain, Gautama Buddha revealed his true appearance. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas sat cross-legged on the ground, chanting devoutly. The light of Buddha illuminated the dark sky and the foot of the mountain. The light of Buddha was so bright that even the big black umbrella could not cover it in the dark night. A layer of golden light plated Ning Ke and Sang Sang and then seeped into their bodies. Inspired by Gautama Buddha, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas came to the east to suppress the evil spirits. An earth-shaking roar came from the wilderness. An indigo lion hundreds of feet high roared toward the sky, and the light of Buddha shone again. Ning Ke's face turned pale because the light was too bright, because he felt pain, and because Sang Sang hiding in his body was very sad in the light of Buddha. He felt Sang Sang's weakness. The Bodhisattvas riding the indigo lion and the white tiger were each as powerful as Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva. He knew that Sang Sang could no longer defeat them. The 10,000 Buddhas worshipping, looking at the countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness, Ning Ke laughed and said, "If this snow mountain is not their ancestor, why are they anxious and afraid?" As he spoke, the smoke and dust in the wilderness rose, and a yellow dragon roared down the snow mountain. In front of it was the indigo lion hundreds of feet high. As it ran, the sky and earth changed color. Looking at the indigo lion that seemed to swallow the night sky, Ning Ke thought of Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's powerful means in the Styx River and could not help but feel uneasy. Now Sang Sang was even weaker, how could she be a match for these bodhisattvas? To his surprise, the indigo lion suddenly stopped in front of the golden pond. Because it stopped so suddenly, its huge body fell heavily, lifting up a lot of black mud. The indigo lion seemed to be very afraid of the water in the pond. It stretched out its front paw to try to step on the narrow mud paths between the ponds. However, its body was so big that one paw was like a palace in the human world, and it was as heavy as a mountain. The mud paths were immediately crushed, and the pond water soaked its paw. With a painful and fearful howl, thousands of willow trees by the pond bent down again. The indigo lion retreated in fear, and the golden light of Buddha was constantly emitted from its paw, as if it was burning. The indigo lion retreated in fear, and the wilderness was quiet for a moment. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas did not dare to try to walk into the golden pond. They could only sit cross-legged on the ground and kept chanting. Ning Ke did not understand. When he and Sang Sang entered the golden pond, although the light of Buddha also made them a little uncomfortable, they were not as painful and frightened as the indigo lion. Why did these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas not dare to enter the golden ponds around the snow mountain? If it was the inhibition set by Buddha, how could it be aimed at his followers and heirs? Sang Sang said, "At least the academy is right about one thing. The Buddhism sect is really disgusting." Buddha entered nirvana and entered the quantum superposition state. Because of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, Buddha in nirvana did not have a strong ability to protect himself, so he forbade the disciples of the Buddhism sect from approaching the snow mountain. The thousands of golden ponds around the snow mountain were the inhibition set by Buddha. They were so vigilant against the most devout followers and heirs. Ning Ke felt a little emotional. He thought that even if they could really avoid Haotian's eyes and live like this forever, what was the point? He had excellent eyesight and could see the handsome monk on the back of the indigo lion. He could not help but wonder if Buddha would become this monk if he was in the world. If Buddha is in the wilderness now, can't he remove his inhibition? I can't, because the Buddha who laid down the restriction wasn't the same Buddha as he is now. What's the benefit of setting up such a problem for himself? The benefit is that Buddha in the state of nirvana never needs to worry about being woken up by others. We are here, and we have woken him up. Buddha did not expect that we could come here. Even if we were here, it would not affect his state, because we are not bodhisattvas or Buddhas, and we cannot compete with him for the faith of the Buddhism sect. Ning Ke looked at the young monk on the indigo lion and suddenly had an idea. Sang Sang directly rejected his idea and said, "Buddha is not fixed, so he naturally cannot have the real power. But even if he turns into a bodhisattva, how can you kill him?" Ning Ke said, "I am not sad. Anyway, those Buddhas and bodhisattvas can't come in." Sang Sang said, "But I am gradually weakening. If this stalemate continues, I will die eventually. I have said many times that I will not let you die." Ning Ke looked at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness and said with a smile, "The arrival of these people and what you have just said prove that my guess is right. Even if your guess is right and this snow mountain is the Buddha's original body, you can't change the current situation, because you can't kill Buddha." "Why do I have to kill Buddha?" Ning Ke walked to the nearest pond, took out the iron cutlass, and cut off a few willows. Then he put down the cutlass, sat under the willow tree and began to weave. He wanted to weave something, but his movements were a little clumsy. Sang Sang asked, "What do you want to weave?" Ning Ke said, "I want to weave a knife." Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "Let me do it." Ning Ke smiled and handed over the control of the body. In the house of Yenming Lake, Sun Sang's favorite thing to do was to pick weeping willows by the lake and weave small objects. Soon, a somewhat cute willow knife appeared in his hand. Sang Sang returned the body to him and asked, "Why do you weave a willow knife?" Ning Ke smiled without answering and cut off a lotus flower. He used the lotus flower to collect some clear water from the pond, tilted the lotus branch slightly, and poured the water from the flower on the iron cutlass. The iron cutlass suddenly became extremely sharp, mixed with gold and full of Buddha's will. After doing these strange things, he carried Sangsang's body on his back, holding the big black umbrella in one hand and the iron cutlass in the other, and walked to the snow mountain. Sangsang said, "What are you going to do? If you don't answer me this time, I will kill you." Ning Ke said, "I am going to see Buddha." Sangsang said, "Why do you want to see Buddha? And you have already seen him." Ning Ke said, "I have told you long ago that seeing Buddha is to cultivate Buddhism. If you don't cultivate Buddhism, how can you get rid of the three poisons of greed, anger, and delusion in your body? How can you tear open the black sky?" Sangsang asked, "Do you really want to cultivate Buddhism?" Ning Ke said, "If I can't kill Buddha, I will cultivate Buddhism. I will take his Buddha's nature and cultivate myself into Buddha. I will let all living beings believe in me. What can Buddha do to me?" Sangsang was a little confused and asked, "How are you going to cultivate yourself into Buddha?" "I have thought about it a long time ago. I have thought about it before I crossed the river." Ning Ke came to a cliff platform and untied Sangsang's body. He lifted the dark and heavy iron cutlass and heavily chopped the ground of the cliff platform. He said, "I am going to cultivate this Buddha again." "This is what you mean by cultivating Buddhism?" "Cultivating Buddhism. Isn't it just to repair Buddha again? Is the Academy always thinking in such a weird way? Second brother's cultivation is also to repair, but his repair is to fight. I am a real cultivator." Ning Ke chopped randomly on the cliff platform and began to cut the protruding stones on the edge. He said proudly, "Buddha's toes are too wide. I have to make them more graceful. I have not slept for a day and a night. I just came home. I am very tired. Please vote for me to comfort me." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 990. The Buddhist scriptures once said that it was disrespectful to sculpt Buddha statues. But in fact, there were Buddha statues in countless ancient temples and murals on the walls. The stone Buddha statue on the top of the tile mountain behind the Lank temple soared into the sky. The body of Buddha turned into the Prajna peak after his death was also a kind of Buddha statue. There were also countless Buddha statues in the Nirvana world in the chessboard. On the contrary, Hautian Taoism, the real ruler of this world, had never erected a statue for Hautian. This situation vaguely revealed some problems. There was a reason for the Buddhism sect to erect countless Buddha statues. Ning Ke wanted to see if he could cut off the connection between Buddha and all living beings through the Buddha statues. This was his Buddhism cultivation. It was just that some things could be thought clearly and said proudly, but it was very difficult to actually do it. This snow mountain was very majestic. If it was the starting coordinate of Buddha in this world or the collection of the original Buddha nature, the broad cliff platform where he stood was just a toe of Buddha. What was more troublesome was that the black rocks between the mountains were very hard. Even if he used the Great Spirit to wield his cutlass, it would be very difficult. The dark iron cutlass kept falling on the black cliff rocks, making thunderous noises and shaking the pebbles. However, it could only cut off a very thin layer of rock skin. At the current speed, it would take Ning Ke a long time to make Buddha's toenail rounder. Others would make a last-minute effort when they are desperate, but you are repairing Buddha's feet. Sangsang felt that his approach was very incomprehensible. She could not understand how Ning Ke could change the current situation even if he repaired Buddha Mountain. Ning Ke kept chopping the rocks with the iron cutlass and said, "I can't explain it to you clearly. You will understand when you finish cultivating. The so-called Buddhism cultivation is Buddhism cultivation. Buddhism cultivation was Buddhism cultivation. The two cultivations were naturally not the same." Sangsang said, "Even so, do you know how to repair it? The Academy only knows how to destroy. When will it build?" The Buddha statue on the Wa mountain was directly cut by Jun Mo with the iron sword, and he was cutting the Prajna peak. From this point of view, the academy was indeed better at destroying Buddha statues and had no experience in repairing Buddha statues. Ning Ke inserted the iron cutlass into a crack in the cliff and pulled it hard. A rock as big as a watermelon flew out. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "You have a prejudice against the academy. Who said that we don't know how to build? If we can build Chang'an, why can't we build a Buddha statue?" Sang Sang said, "You can't even weave willow branches, and you want to carve something decent?" Ning Ke said, "I told you before that I've already thought about it. I've thought about it on the other side of the river. Didn't I use the redwood tree to build a boat? This is training. Using a wooden boat as practice for the Buddha statue. It sounds a little unreliable." "How is it unreliable?" "At most, the Buddha that is cultivated in the end will be a bit ugly, but it won't delay anything." Sang Sang was a little tired. She felt that there was nothing to say, or she didn't want to continue talking to him, so she kept silent. Talking was a one-sided thing, and there was no need for dialogue. Ning Ke didn't care and continued to nag, waving the iron cutlass to cut the rocks between the cliffs. The roars continued and the black rocks flew everywhere. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field outside the golden pond couldn't hear what he was saying, but they could see what he was doing. Their expressions gradually became serious. Especially the majestic indigo lion at the front, which was thousands of feet high. It seemed particularly angry and a little uneasy, constantly roaring at the dark sky and shaking its head. The mane on the indigo lion's neck was shining with the light of Buddha, as dense as a forest. As it shook its head angrily, the mane all stood up, looking like countless swords. Ning Ke was resting with the iron cutlass at this time. Looking at the indigo lion's change in the distance, he was a little startled at first, and then he laughed, pointing there and said, "Look. That big cat is angry." Sang Sang didn't care about him. Hearing the laughter coming from the mountain, the indigo lion became angrier, and the movement of shaking its head became more and more wild. The violent airflow brought by it even tore the clouds in the sky into pieces. In the horrible turbulence and roaring, the mane on the indigo lion's neck, shining with the light of Buddha, shot out and turned into hundreds of black shadows, breaking through the clouds and flying to the front of the mountain. The thousands of golden ponds outside the mountain were the inhibition left by Buddha, and even the indigo lion couldn't cross it. However, its mane was lifeless and could launch long-range attacks. The indigo lion's mane instantly came to the cliff and fell like rain. There was a dense collision sound, and countless gravel splashed everywhere. Every mane seemed to be an indestructible spear. 3 spears made of mane fiercely pierced Song Song's body. Ning Ke suddenly became serious and rolled to her side. He opened the big black umbrella and forcefully inserted the handle into the cliff. Song Song's body was not damaged, but there was a thin white cut on her cheek. Her body was a divine body, so it could be imagined how terrible the power contained in the indigo lion's mane was. "Look, they are really scared, which means what I did is really useful." Holding the umbrella handle tightly, Ning Ke leaned on Song Song's tall body and whispered in her ear. The indigo lion's furious long-range attacks were still going on. Dull collision sounds came from everywhere on the cliff. 2 big manes fell on the big black umbrella, which made Ning Ke's hand sore. Then, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field also took out their cultivation instruments and threw them to the mountain from a long distance. However, the cultivation of these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas was obviously lower than that of the indigo lion. Only a few big Bodhisattvas' magic instruments fell on the cliff and caused a shock. Most of the instruments could not even fly to the cliff and fell over the golden ponds. There seemed to be an invisible cover over the golden ponds. Those Buddha's magic instruments fell on it and were instantly shaken into pieces. They turned into countless golden streamers and scattered around. Those instruments contained the light of Buddha, which made the pond brighter and even the dark sky seemed to be illuminated. Ning Kai squinted and felt Song Song's pain in his body. He silently looked at the field. After a long time, the terrorist attacks from the field finally stopped. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas were silent. The indigo lion shook its head and roared unwillingly to the sky. Ning Kai closed the black umbrella and stood up to look at the field in the distance. He was angry but also helpless. He could not resist the power of those big Bodhisattvas and the indigo lion. He opened the black umbrella in his hand to the field, which was an insulting gesture. As for whether those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas could understand it or not, it was not within his consideration. He did not need people to understand to curse. Then he looked at the indigo lion whose mane was obviously less and scolded, "Keep shaking. If you can, shake off all your rotten hair and become a bald donkey. Our academy specializes in killing bald donkeys." The indigo lion angrily roared back, but it could do nothing to him. Ning Kai was even angrier because Song Song's body was almost injured. The mane and the instrument turned into the light of Buddha, which made Sang Sang weaker and more painful. This was unacceptable to him. The light of Buddha between the mountain and the pond was extremely strong. He carried Sang Sang on his back and tied the handle of the umbrella in front of him to make sure that Song Song's body was completely covered by the black umbrella. Then he walked back to the original position with the iron cutlass. This mountain was really solid. Even the mane of the indigo lion and the instrument of the bodhisattva could only break a very thin layer of the surface of the cliff, which was of no help to him. Ning Kai carried Sang Sang on his back and held the big black umbrella. He bent down and kept waving the iron cutlass against the hard cliff rocks, like an old farmer in a bamboo hat farming in the hot sun. Farming was always the most difficult activity for human beings. Sweat kept appearing on his forehead. The sweat dripped onto his hands and the ground and mixed with the broken cliff rocks, as if he was irrigating. "I'm really tired." He wiped off the sweat and said while gasping, "Why are you so tired?" Sang Sang said, "I used to plant peppers in the yard in the city of Wei. I'm not tired." Ning Kai felt hurt and said, "That's because your body is weak and cold, so you can't sweat. Why don't you try it like me? It's very annoying to sweat everywhere. My hands keep slipping, so of course I get tired easily." Song Song's voice was a little weak but still emotionless, "You can't do it." Ning Kai had said before that what he hated most was to be told that he couldn't do it, especially by a woman. He couldn't stand being told that he couldn't do it by his own woman. "That's because you're fat. How can I not be tired carrying such a heavy woman? When we were in the city of Wei, why didn't you carry me to loosen the soil and prune the branches? You have to take the main responsibility." He shouted angrily, "I didn't suffer so much when I carried you on my back when I was young. I don't want you to choose a thin one, but you should at least choose a slim one, right?" Sang Sang said, "You like thin ones?" Ning Kai said, "Is this something I like? I'm just talking about the weight." Sang Sang said, "You still like thin ones." Ning Kai threw the iron cutlass to the ground and said, "I told you, this is not something I like." Sang Sang said, "The divine body I choose must be perfect. It's just that in front of the gate of the divine kingdom, your teacher injected a streak of red dust into it, so it became fat. If you want to blame someone, you should blame him." Ning Kai silently picked up the iron cutlass and continued to cut the mountain. Sang Sang said, "Go on." Ning Kai hesitated for a long time and finally said, "A student should not speak of his teacher's mistakes." Sang Sang asked, "You are a Buddhist. How can you get rid of my poison?" Ning Kai said, "You and I are husband and wife. When I become a Buddha, you will naturally become a Buddha. Not to mention the poison, these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will be our little brothers. How fun it will be." Sang Sang asked, "How did you come up with this idea?" Ning Kai said, "Why do you have so many questions? Just listen to your man." "Who am I?" I'm the hero of this story, and you're the heroine. When in danger, the hero must stand in front of the heroine and solve her problems. In the end, the two can live a happy life. A happy life? I'm a little tired. I'll sleep for a while. Sang Sang said. Ning Kai felt that her voice was a little sweet, as if she had drunk sugar water. Then he also felt that his throat, which was burning because of thirst, suddenly became sweet. He was very happy. Sang Sang began to sleep, and she slept for 3 years. When she woke up, Buddha's right foot had been repaired and turned into a very delicate little foot. It looked a little familiar, and if it was whiter, it would have looked more familiar. Ning Kai worked hard for 3 years and finally had a harvest. He repaired Buddha's foot into Sang Sang's foot. Thank you very much. I've been working hard. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 991. I rarely hit the jackpot at night, which means that I have made great progress in my ability to control it. But sometimes I feel regretful, because I am the most emotional when I hit the jackpot. I always think that the chapters one hit the jackpot are the best ones, such as this one. Please have a taste. Besides, today is Monday, so please vote for me. Thank you. Through his eyes, Sang Sang saw that Buddha Mountain was the same as before. The cliff plateau had changed a little, and the field was the same. The Buddha and Bodhisattva were still chanting. The indigo lion was still angry for 3 years. Sang Sang wondered if it was tired. She suddenly wanted to know how Ning Kai spent the past 3 years. How did I spend the past 3 years? I dug everywhere with an iron cutlass. Don't you know why this mountain is so hard? It's been 3 years, and I only made such a piece of land. If the old farmers in the southern kingdom saw this, they would look down on me. But it's really tiring. What should I do if I am tired? Just take a rest. Just like eating when you are hungry. Ning Kai spoke quickly, and his tone fluctuated greatly, as if he was talking about something very surprising. In fact, it was because he had not talked to anyone for 3 years. Sang Sang was silent for a moment, and then she asked, "What do you eat?" In the past 3 years, Ning Kai could only hear the sound of the iron cutlass falling on the cliff, the indigo lion roaring in the field, the sound of the wind blowing the rolling stones, the sound of cicadas and frogs in the pond at the foot of the mountain, and the sound of himself talking to himself. Now he finally heard Sang Sang's voice. His intuition was as if he had eaten a pot of heavenly power pills, and he felt comfortable all over, as if he was floating to the depths of the sky. It was so wonderful. What do you eat? Hey, there are so many delicious things in this poor place. Boiled frogs, fried frogs, roasted frogs, raw frogs, and so on. When Sang Sang was a child, Ning Kai told her that in his world, there was a kind of people who made money by talking. They talked very fast, and they liked to rhyme and repeat, or they liked and were good at being talkative. At this time, listening to Ning Kai's long list of words about frogs, she felt that he was probably learning from those people. Ning Kai did not know what she was thinking about because he had no time to feel it. He was just happily talking about his life in the past 3 years. His saliva splashed everywhere, which seemed to be more than his sweat. He said proudly, "Yes, there's oil, of course there's oil. I've squeezed some lotus seed oil from these wild lotus flowers. Whether it's used to mix wild vegetables or to fry frogs, it's very fragrant." Sang Sang said, "You should be a vegetarian." Ning Kai said excitedly, "Don't worry, I have never forgotten to pair meat and vegetables." Stewed lotus root, fried lotus root, freshly peeled lotus seed, crunchy and not bitter at all. Actually, my favorite food is fried cicadas. Whether it's roasted with lotus leaves or fried raw, it's so fragrant. But when I think of third senior sister, I can't bring myself to eat it. 3 years later, he was so thin and dark, looking no different from the poor serfs under the Xiankong temple. On the contrary, Sang Sang felt much better. The three poisons of greed, aversion and obsession were still there, but they were calmer. There should be no danger of the poisons breaking out, and she was not as weak as before she fell asleep. Sang Sang could see him and could imagine how hard he had been living in the past 3 years. At this time, listening to his cheerful narration, she felt more and more sorry for him. That kind of emotion was so strong that she felt a little sad. If she could shed tears, she would shed them. Ning Ke felt the sadness in his heart. After a moment of silence, he said with a smile, "Don't worry. You know I'm good at living in the wild. Didn't I do this often when I was a child?" Sang Sang did not speak. She thought that no matter how lonely he was in the Min Mountain when he was a child, at least he had her by his side. Now he still carried her on his back, but she was not with him in the past 3 years. Ning Ke was still murmuring. She listened quietly and gradually narrowed her eyes. That was a smile. Then she felt a little warm and gentle, and then she frowned in his heart. Sang Sang was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I'm a little tired. I want to sleep a little longer." Ning Ke did not expect this. After a moment of surprise, he said with a smile, "Okay." Sang Sang began to sleep again. This time, she slept for a whole 10 years. 10 years later, Sang Sang woke up. This time, she found that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field had not changed, but the mountain in front of her had changed a lot. Ning Ke had finished repairing the feet of the Buddha with the iron cutlass and was recarving the clothes on the Buddha. The iron cutlass kept cutting between the cliffs, and a line of the sleeves of the clothes slowly took shape. Compared with the clumsiness and stiffness when he first cultivated Buddhism, Ning Ke's technique was much more skillful now. The iron cutlass moved freely, like the most experienced carvers in the small town in front of the Lank Temple. The improvement of the carving technique was exchanged with time and hard work. It had been 13 years, and Ning Ke did not know how many times he had waved the iron cutlass. The cliff was full of his sweat. Ning Ke felt that she had woken up. His body was a little stiff. After a long silence, he slowly inserted the iron cutlass into the crack of the cliff, reached out and patted her buttocks. He said with a smile, "You're awake." "Yes." Sang Sang said. "Then I'll rest for a while." Ning Ke sighed, a little tired and a little satisfied. He untied her and held her in his arms. He walked to the edge of the cliff and sat down, looking at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas had been chanting sutras for 13 years. The golden pond was full of Buddha's light. If Sang Sang had not been cured of the 3 poisons in her body, she would have died in the Buddha's light. The indigo lion roared angrily at the cliff, and the clouds in the sky were suddenly broken. Ning Ke looked at the angry indigo lion and said with a smile, "Why are you roaring in spring? My wife has woken up. She didn't fall asleep because of your anger. Shouldn't I be the one roaring in spring?" Sang Sang looked at the lines on the hem of the Buddha's clothes. It did not look like a kasaya. She asked, "Do you need to repair the Buddha's clothes when you cultivate Buddhism?" Ning Ke said, "I have to do things carefully. How can I make mistakes in such details?" Sang Sang asked, "Is it still a Buddha without a kasaya?" Ning Ke said, "Why must a Buddha wear a kasaya?" Sang Sang asked, "Then what should a Buddha wear?" Ning Ke thought of the clothes he designed and said proudly, "You will know when I carve it. You will like it." After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, "Your clothes are also torn." As the world wayfarer of the academy, Ning Ke naturally wore the academy uniform when he walked in the human world. The academy uniform he chose was black, which was very resistant to dirt. Moreover, the academy uniform was very strong and could not be torn by ordinary attacks. Therefore, he basically did not change it during those years. He only casually washed it when it was too dirty. When he was imprisoned by Sang Sang in the West Hill Divine Palace and then cut into pieces, he did not have the uniform with him. Later, Sang Sang threw it to him. This black uniform had accompanied him in the world of the chessboard for countless years, but it was still not rotten. During these 13 years, the uniform had become tattered. It could be seen how hard he had worked and how many things he had done over the years. Now Ning Ke was very dark and thin. His hands were covered with thick calluses, and he looked more like a farmer. But his eyes were very bright. As the poison in Sang Sang's body was gradually removed, his mood became better and his spirit became more determined. He felt stronger and stronger. I have made many new dishes over the years. Feeling that Sang Sang's condition had indeed improved a lot, Ning Ke was very happy. He held her body and pointed to the pond at the foot of the mountain. He said happily, "I always thought there were no fish in the pond. Later, I found that there were indeed fish in the depths of the lotus field. I made a pot of fish soup. It was so fresh. I have nothing to say." He smacked his lips and recalled the delicious fish soup. Then he became depressed and said, "It's a pity that there are too few fish. It's not easy to catch them, and I don't have much time." Sang Sang was silent for a long time and said, "I am a little tired. Let me sleep a little longer." After saying this, she began to sleep again. No one knew how many years it would take for her to wake up again. Ning Ke looked at her face in his arms with a dull expression. After a long time, he squeezed out a smile with difficulty and said, "Sleep well. I will deal with things here." Sang Sang kept sleeping, which reminded him of the time when she was seriously ill and dying. It was a shadow in his heart. But thinking that Sang Sang was indeed getting better, he thought that the 3 poisons planted by Buddha were too powerful. It might take some time. He felt a little tired. He sat on the edge of the cliff and looked at the field. He was silent for a long time. The body in his arms was so tall, but his back was so lonely. Fatigue and pain were not difficult to bear because there was hope. The most difficult thing to bear in the world was loneliness. He had been cultivating Buddhism for 13 years, but he only said a few words to Sang Sang. This was loneliness. Because of emotional problems, Ning Ke luxuriously gave himself a whole day off. He did not wake up until the morning light rose from the edge of the dark sky and disappeared quickly. He stretched himself, and his muscles and bones rubbed against each other. Then he lowered his head and kissed Sang Sang's chubby face a few times, making a loud sound. "Black, pig. Black, pig. La, la la, la 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 la. La 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 la. La, la. La, la la, la 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 la. La 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 la. La, la. Black, pig." In the lonely song, he carried Sang Sang on his back, tied the big black umbrella, and waved the iron cutlass. He climbed up and down the cliff, skillfully cutting and carving new lines one after another. Buddha had a pair of delicate little feet. Buddha's kasaya gradually changed. It looked a little elegant and simple. It dragged the skirt, as if someone had put a large handmaiden dress on her small body. 3 years later, Sang Sang woke up. She stared at the familiar maid's uniform in silence. Ning Ke bit a lotus branch and asked, "How do you feel? Do I look like this?" Sang Sang said, "If I wore it again, it wouldn't be so loose." Ning Ke said, "Although your figure has changed, in my eyes, you are still the same as before." Sang Sang asked, "Where are you now?" Ning Ke pointed to the peak and said, "Tomorrow, I will start to repair the face of Buddha." Sang Sang was a little surprised, and she was surprised that she did not show any joy. She said, "Much faster than in the previous years." Ning Ke said with a smile, "Nothing else. I am familiar with it." Sang Sang asked, "Will it be over after the repair?" Ning Ke said, "Of course. It will be over soon. Sang Sang was silent for a long time and said, yes, it will be over soon. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 992. Aren't you curious about why I can cultivate so fast? You said that you're good at it. Can't you tell I'm being polite? I haven't heard you speak for many years. Ning Ke was silent for a while and said, I haven't heard you speak for many years either. Sang Sang was also silent for a while and said, then, why? Because my guess is right. After cultivating for 16 years, your poison is getting stronger and stronger. Although you haven't woken up yet, it makes me stronger and stronger. Naturally, I'm faster and faster. Ning Ke said happily, of course, the most important reason is that my carving technique is really good now. If you give me a piece of rotten wood, I can carve at least a few hundred taels of silver in the human world. Now I'm not only a talisman Taoism master, but also a carving master. No, I'm a grandmaster. Sang Sang gently nodded and looked very calm. Ning Ke was a little surprised and said, I said it's a lot of silver. Why don't you have any reaction? Sang Sang nodded and said after a while, I'm a little tired. I want to sleep a little more. Every time she woke up, she would fall asleep again after saying a few words. Ning Ke was not as disappointed as before. He thought that although the poison in her heart was gradually gone, Sang Sang was still weak and should sleep a little more. Sleep was the best way to restore spirit. Sang Sang had slept for 16 years, and he hadn't slept for the past 16 years. He was sleepy and exhausted to an unimaginable degree. He took out the dried frog meat from his arms, tore off a few pieces and stuffed them into his mouth and began chewing. The frog meat was long and tender. As long as it was cooked properly, it would be very delicious. For example, it could be cooked in a spicy pot, boiled with green peppers, or grilled. But no matter how delicious it was, it would become wood residue in the mouth of the diner after eating it for many years. No matter how greedy a person was, he would want to vomit after eating frog meat for 16 years. Ning Ke didn't vomit. There was no expression on his face. He chewed mechanically and looked very dull until he chewed all the dried frog meat in his mouth and swallowed it. His miserable childhood experience made him realize clearly that the most difficult enemy for humans to deal with was definitely not bad food, but the lack of food, because starvation was more terrifying than death. Since the end of the last decade, he rarely thought about food. Time was too long and loneliness was too unbearable. He spent all his time and energy on cultivating Buddhism. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, so he caught a lot of frog meat in the golden pond and hung them on the cliff to dry under the sun. These frog meat became his main source of food. He didn't need to spend time to process them. When he was hungry, he would take some out and eat it. The dried frog meat had no taste at all. No matter how hard he chewed, he couldn't taste any fragrance. It was hard to swallow. He sat on the edge of the cliff and looked at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness, using their pain as seasoning. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness became angrier and angrier. As he made the Buddha's figure more and more unpresentable and carved a maid's dress for the Buddha, their anger reached its peak. The chanting echoing between heaven and earth became more and more majestic, and the Buddha's light falling on his body became more and more terrifying. The real horror was the indigo lion, which was hundreds of feet high. The front hooves of the indigo lion were covered with blood and mud. It lowered its head and slowly licked its injured front hooves. It didn't roar as it did in the past years, but its silence was filled with great dominance and danger. A few days ago, the indigo lion finally stepped into the golden pond. Although it didn't rush to the foot of the mountain and only broke a few ponds, it was shaken back to the wilderness by the Buddha's inhibition. But there was progress after all. the indigo lion didn't become stronger. It was just that the Buddha's statue was gradually deformed under Ninkei's iron cutlass. The Buddha's Dharma power here was gradually weakened, and so was the inhibition. The thousands of feet high indigo lion stopped healing and raised its head. Its head broke through the clouds, and the scene was very shocking. It looked at Ninkei on the Buddha's statue with a solemn and cold expression, full of determination to kill. Ninkei was very tired and sleepy. Sang Sang fell asleep again, which made him very sad. Besides, he felt that frog meat was really bad, so he was in a bad mood. He wanted to rest for a while and do something else to relieve the boring and lonely life of cultivating Buddhism. Just at this moment, he saw the indigo lion raise its head and provoke in the wilderness, which made him angry. He untied the iron bow and pulled the hard bowstring to the fullest degree. Then he released his fingers without any warning. A round aura turbulence burst out from the bowstring, and the dark iron arrow disappeared without a trace. The next moment, the handsome monk sitting cross-legged on the back of the indigo lion suddenly burst out a big stream of blood from his chest. Then he fell to the ground hundreds of feet away and hit the wilderness with a muffled sound. The handsome monk died, but the Buddha didn't. Maybe the handsome monk was the Buddha in the past 16 years, but when the iron arrow hit him, he was not the Buddha anymore. His and Sangsang's judgment was right. The Buddha's position in this world was unpredictable. Even light couldn't catch up with him, let alone the primordial 13 arrows. The indigo lion was shocked by the handsome monk's death, and then it became extremely angry. It roared furiously at Ninkei, who was on the cliff. The clouds in front of the lion's head were instantly shaken into countless tiny wisps of clouds, and countless golden lotuses in the golden pond fell down one after another. It was unimaginably powerful. Ninkei also roared at the indigo lion. His roar was like thunder exploding in the field. There were no words, but it was filled with an extremely domineering aura, extremely wild and unrestrained. As he cultivated Buddhism for a long time, the inhibition left by the Buddha gradually weakened. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness could break through the golden pond at any time. That was why the indigo lion was so confident and cold. But also as he cultivated Buddhism for a long time, the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession in Sang Sang gradually dissipated. Haotian slowly recovered in his sleep, and Ninkei naturally became more powerful. In the end, it came back to time or cause and effect. Cause and effect were sequential, and so was time. The sequence could determine the shape of the universe and the outcome of this war. Ninkei was very confident. He knew that the final winner would be himself and Sang Sang. Killing a Maha Bodhisattva with one arrow and roaring at the indigo lion like a real beast, Meng Qi felt great. The boring life of cultivating Buddhism became vivid because of this little episode. The loneliness and rejection that had accumulated in his heart for many years disappeared instantly. He climbed to the bottom of the cliff and continued his cultivation. 2 years later, Ninkei repaired the hands of the Buddha. The Buddha was not holding a purified bottle or a stick, but an umbrella made of black cliff, so it was naturally a black umbrella. In the beginning, it took him 3 years to fix one of the Buddha's feet. Then, it took him 10 years to fix the other foot. At the same time, he fixed the hem of the maid's clothes. It took him another 3 years to fix the maid's clothes. Compared to that, his current speed was indeed much faster. Then, Ninkei's cultivation became much slower, because he had reached the top of the mountain and began to repair the appearance of the Buddha. There was no doubt that this was the most critical stage of cultivating Buddhism. The iron cutlass fell very slowly on the plump face and the round earlobes of the Buddha. It was as if the cutlass was picking up a mountain. Because of the cautiousness, it felt extremely solemn. Another 10 years passed unknowingly. The ears of the Buddha were no longer hanging down to the shoulders, but looming behind the newly carved hair. The face of the Buddha was no longer as round as a full moon. It became much thinner and smaller, and looked very ordinary. The iron cutlass finally fell on the lips of the Buddha. The Buddha opened his lips silently. Suddenly, countless words of Buddha rang between heaven and earth. The light of Buddha shone brightly on the field. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas chanted together, and a supreme power of Buddha went straight into Ning Kei's chest and abdomen. With a puff, Ning Kei spat out a mouthful of blood, and his eyes suddenly dimmed. At the same time, he felt that Sang Sang in his heart was frowning slightly and in pain, as if she was about to wake up. He knew he was wrong. Without hesitation, he chopped hundreds of times and directly cut off the mouth of the Buddha. The tightly closed thin lips were cut off, and then the sound of Buddha and the power of Buddha disappeared quietly. The cultivation of Buddhism was finished. Now the Buddha was dark, thin, small, and dressed in a loose maid's dress. Sang Sang woke up, looked at the Buddha and said, "You still like her more." The she in this sentence was not Mo Shanshan, although Mo Shanshan had a pair of extremely thin lips and liked to close them tightly. Sang Sang said that the she he liked more was Black Sang Sang. Ning Kei smiled and said, "I have seen you like this for 20 years in the human world, so of course I like you more. In the future, when I see you in the human world for a long time, I will naturally like you more." He looked at Sang Sang's face carved by the black cliff stone and laughed happily. Sang Sang said, "She doesn't have a mouth." Ning Kei said, "Anyway, you don't like to talk." Sang Sang said, "How can I teach the world if I don't talk? How can I seize the hearts of the masses and become a Buddha?" Ning Kei said, "I can speak for you. You know, I can be a chatterbox when I need to." His cultivation of Buddhism was finished, but he had not become a Buddha yet. There were only a few remnants of the inhibition left by Buddha. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the field had entered the periphery of the Golden Pond in the past 10 years, and the indigo lion was not far from the foot of the mountain. The indigo lion's body was covered with wounds, and its 4 hooves stirred up the mud at the bottom of the pond, as if it was dyed with ink. It slowly and firmly moved toward Buddha Mountain, and each step was as heavy as 1,000 pounds. 10 years was enough for Ning Kei to repair his Buddha face and for many things to happen. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas came from the field, and the footprints they left turned into a river, leading to the distant west. A clear river came from the west, and there were countless gloomy auras and countless ghosts and skeletons in it. The river from the west was the Styx River, which was summoned by countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas with great perseverance and supreme Dharma. It kept diluting the light of Buddha in the golden pond. Ning Kei waved his cutlass, and the vermilion bird roared fiercely. Haotian's divine flame gushed out from the blade, walked around the foot of the mountain, and cut out a bottomless ditch. After the avalanche, countless snow accumulated under the cliff for decades, and suddenly melted when it met the fire. It flowed into the ditch and became a new clear river. The Styx River and the new river met at the foot of the mountain, but they did not merge. They looked at each other coldly and maintained their own auras. No one could move forward. Ning Kei sat cross-legged on the top of the Buddha mountain, closed his eyes, and began to meditate. He finished cultivating the Buddha in the mountain, and began to cultivate the Buddha in his heart. He wanted to become a Buddha, the only true Buddha in the world. My wife will be here tomorrow. I hope she can relax. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Countless green lotuses and willows were crushed into splinters in the mud, and then covered by the shadow of the ship, no longer visible. As for the croaking of the frogs and the chirping of the cicadas, no one knew where they went. The big ship moved forward slowly and came to the big river at the foot of the mountain. The river bank collapsed, and the waves soared into the sky. Half of the river was the Netherworld River, and there were countless resentful spirits and skeletons in it. These resentful spirits and skeletons did not resist the Buddha light emitted by the ship. They were obediently and voluntarily purified into wisps of aura. The resentful souls and skeletons transformed into countless streams of pure aura, once again attaching themselves to the hull of the ship, making the Buddha's aura of the ship even stronger. The ship continued to move forward, breaking through the surface of the river formed by snow and water, and was about to touch the cliff. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas stood on the deck, putting their palms together and looking at Ninkei solemnly. The indigo lion stood at the bow of the ship and looked at the cliff anxiously, as if it wanted to jump over. When the ship met the mountain, it was unknown whether it could destroy the mountain, collapse the Buddha, and shock Ninkei to death. But how could the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and the indigo lion let him continue to become a Buddha after climbing the mountain? Ninkei sat cross-legged on the top of the Buddha, in the bun of the black and thin handmaiden. He closed his eyes and felt everything he had experienced. He was at the critical moment of becoming a Buddha, so he did not know what was happening outside. Even if he knew, he could not pay attention to it, because he could not afford to be distracted. He knew that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the wilderness would not watch him become a Buddha, take away the Buddha's faith, and make all things his own. He did not make any arrangements in advance, because he knew that he was not fighting alone. Sangsang's body was put aside by him, and the big black umbrella opened. Suddenly, Sangsang opened her eyes. There was a bright light in her slender willow-shaped eyes. She had woken up several times in the past decades, but she had never opened her eyes. Because she had always been in Ninkei's heart and had not returned to her divine body. With Ninkei's successful cultivation of Buddhism, the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession in her body were about to be eliminated. She could finally return to her divine body, and she could finally open her eyes to see the world. Sangsang stood up, holding the big black umbrella, and looked at the big ship at the foot of the mountain, slightly squinting her eyes. Is this the savior of mercy? She waved her sleeves, and the flowers on her indigo dress bloomed again. A terrible hurricane rushed from the peak to the foot of the mountain, and then roared toward the giant ship on the river. The indigo lion on the bow roared angrily, but the roar could not be heard at all, and was poured back into its mouth by the hurricane. It closed its eyes in panic, and its mane was blown backward. There were no sails on the big ship, and the robes of countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas standing on the deck were blown by the hurricane, like thousands of new sails. The forward momentum of the big ship suddenly slowed down. This was the boat of the earth, cut from the earth, and had infinite weight. Sangsang waved her sleeves, and the wind rose, and the wind slowed down the boat. So she had recovered infinite power. However, even she could not completely stop the big ship. The big ship did slow down a lot, but it still kept moving forward, hitting the cliff. The business of the masses is really interesting. Her indigo dress waved slightly, and her figure disappeared from the peak. The next moment, she came to the big ship. The indigo lion roared angrily, and its mane was like a sword, ready to bite. Sangsang glanced at it. The indigo lion suddenly restrained its momentum, showing a timid expression, and turned its head, trembling. Sangsang walked among the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. She looked at the faces of those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Both the Buddhas and the powerful Bodhisattvas did not dare to look at her eyes, and turned their faces away. She was looking for the Buddha among all living beings. All living beings did not dare to look at her, and the Buddha was avoiding her. The big ship was the earth, carrying countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But she was Haotian. If she was given enough time, no one knew whether she could find the Buddha or not. The Buddhas made their own response. They lowered their heads, put their palms together, and walked to the bow of the ship. The Buddhas crowded the Buddhas, and the Bodhisattvas crowded the Bodhisattvas. The big ship became extremely crowded, and Sangsang seemed to be squeezed out of the big ship. Sangsang frowned slightly, stretched out her finger, and pointed between the eyebrows of a Buddha in front of her. The body of the Buddha became brighter and brighter, and finally turned into a pure white light body, dispersing and dying. As soon as there was an empty space on the crowded board, a Buddha stepped forward and filled the vacancy. No matter how many Buddhas she killed, there would always be successors. Then those Buddhas began to commit suicide. The Buddha who cut his face with a knife put the knife across his neck, pulled it hard, and cut off his head. A pure golden light of Buddha rose to the sky, and then scattered on the board of the ship. The Buddha who stabbed his abdomen with the knife moved the blade upwards and stabbed his own heart forcefully. A ray of pure golden Buddha light gushed out from his body and splashed everywhere. Countless Buddhas died one after another, and the light of Buddha on the big ship was unimaginably thick. Sang Sang frowned slightly, and her face became paler and paler, feeling a little uncomfortable. The three poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession were almost eliminated, but they were not completely eliminated after all. Encountering the method of sacrificing the living Buddhas, the remaining poison in her body broke out again, and the last remaining poison was greed. She looked back to the peak. Ning Ke sat there with his legs crossed, eyes closed, meditating, and did not know what was going on. Sang Sang just turned back, and then she came to the peak and stood in front of him. In fact, the last bit of greed will be gone if I kill you. She was silent for a long time, and then reached out her index finger to point between his eyebrows. Ning Ke's eyebrows suddenly became extremely bright, as if transparent. A green seed could be vaguely seen between the transparent eyebrows, which was the linden seed. Ning Ke had been practicing Buddhism on this mountain for decades, but he had been practicing Buddhism for far longer than that. Before entering the chessboard, or 1,000 years ago, Ning Ke once faced the wall for a day in the cliff yard of Xiankong Temple. He did not wake up until the pear blossom fell on his shoulder. That time marked the official beginning of his journey of practicing Buddhism. It was also at that time that he realized the experience of Master Lotus, and at the same time, a linden seed was planted in his heart. After entering the chessboard, he listened to the morning bell and evening drum in the White Tower Temple, and practiced Buddhism for countless years. Then he practiced Buddhism on the statue of Buddha in the Far East for decades, and gradually deepened his Dharma. The linden seed was no longer in his heart, but on his eyebrows. Sang Sang touched it with her finger, and a divine thought entered it, and the linden seed woke up. A small crack appeared between Ning Ke's eyebrows, and a very thin green stem stretched out from it. It swayed in the wind on the peak, and began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye under the light of Buddha from the big ship. The linden seed sprouted, broke out of the soil, opened branches, and then produced countless green leaves. The green leaves hung in the air above the peak, covering the dark sky and all the light of Buddha in the nirvana. This linden tree grew extremely fast, and it gave people a very arrogant feeling. This linden tree grew between Ning Ke's eyebrows, and it gave people a very strange feeling. Under the linden tree, Ning Ke closed his eyes and smiled. No one knew what beautiful scenery he was seeing in his dream. Sang Sang walked to him and sat in the shade of the linden tree. The light of Buddha could no longer shine on her, and her pale face gradually returned to normal. She closed her eyes and fell asleep again. Her sleep was entering Ning Ke's body. Ning Ke woke up. He looked at the giant ship that was getting closer and closer to the cliff, and looked at the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the ship, and said, "The body is the linden tree, and the heart is like a mirror." He wanted to preach Dharma to all living beings, but they were unwilling to listen. They wanted to argue against him and expose his fake Buddha face. Therefore, the Buddha's voice sounded between heaven and earth, and on the big ship, the linden tree is not a tree, and the mirror is not a mirror. It is. I'm not here to reason with you. I'm not the eldest brother. If you are willing to listen to me, it's fine. If not, the Buddhists have their own ways to beat you. The reason I want to tell you is very simple. You must listen to me, or you will be beaten and chopped by knives. Ning Ke looked at the Buddhas and said, I am the only true Buddha. You must believe me. The Buddhas were all angry. Ning Ke said calmly, you must understand. If you can't, then go to hell. As soon as he finished speaking, a Buddha turned into ashes. The next moment, the Buddha came to the peak and sat cross-legged on a leaf that looked like a futon. The green leaves were the leaves of the linden tree. The linden tree grew between his eyebrows. The Buddha put his palms together and bowed to Ning Ke devoutly. Thank you, everyone. If it weren't for your encouragement and spur, I don't know how many times I would have stopped writing these days. Spiritual power does exist. Thank you again. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 994. The peak was a Buddha, and he spent decades cultivating it into Sangsang. There was no Buddha on the surface of the cliff, but there were still some in the depths. Ning Ke turned himself into a Bodhi tree to receive the Buddha and Bodhisattva's letters. The Buddha could no longer keep silent. A sense of Buddha came from the deepest part of the cliff and entered his heart. I have become a Buddha, Ning Ke said to the sense of Buddha. His expression was very relaxed, as if he was talking to an old acquaintance, talking about the most ordinary things. The Buddha said, I am among all living beings. You can't find me or kill me, so you can't become a Buddha. The Buddha here referred to the only true Buddha in heaven and earth. Ning Ke knew it was true. Just as he couldn't kill Haotian in the world of Haotian, he couldn't kill the Buddha in the world of Buddha, let alone find him. Why are you so serious? I never thought that the inheritance of the Buddha position was the same as the inheritance of the throne in the secular world, which must go through bloody slaughter and torment. Ning Ke said with a smile, you are a Buddha, but it doesn't stop me from becoming one. I don't want to rule your world. I am not Haotian, and I have no interest in killing you. I just want to leave. How can you leave? I can become a Buddha by taking away the business of all living beings. How can I take away the business of all living beings? You know, I know. Look, Ning Ke looked at the giant boat on the river, stretched out his right index finger, and wrote a word on the boat. Sangsang was in his heart, and a divine psyche followed his finger and fell on the giant boat. The Bodhi tree on the peak began to sway, and the green Bodhi leaves fluttered in the wind, becoming rounder and wider. Ning Ke and Sangsang cultivated Buddhism, and the method they used was the oneness of heaven and man, which was mysterious and indescribable. Ning Ke's Buddha's wish and Sangsang's heart of heaven merged together, and it was an irresistible psyche. The psyche fell on a Buddha on the giant boat. The psyche told the Buddha, you have to believe me. The Buddha naturally resisted such a blasphemous request. He put his palms together, closed his eyes, and chanted. However, he couldn't hold on for long, and broke into countless light spots, disappearing on the boat. The next moment, the Buddha came to the Bodhi tree on the peak and sat on the Bodhi leaf that looked like a futon, swaying up and down with the wind. His eyebrows revealed a sense of enlightenment and he bowed to Ning Quebec. At this time, 2 Buddhas were brought to the peak by Ning Ke with the Buddha's wish and became his followers. They closed their eyes and began to chant devoutly, praising Ning Quebec. Ning Ke only felt a very faint but real power entering his body from the Bodhi tree. It made him calm and happy, but also felt heavy on his shoulders. He knew that this was probably the power of faith. After countless reincarnations, apart from Haotian, only the Buddha knew how to collect and use the power of faith. The headmaster of academy should have reached this level, but he was unwilling to do so. With Ning Ke's current state, he was far from being able to comprehend this level of divine sense. But now that he was one with Haotian, he naturally understood. Affected by Sangsang's divine psyche, Ning Ke didn't have time to think. He closed his eyes and blinked away the remaining consciousness of Buddha coming from the depths of the cliff. Then he began to chant with the 2 Buddhas in the Bodhi tree. The Buddha was silent, and no one knew where he went. The waves of the river were like angry waves. The big boat struggled to move forward, trying to break the mountain and stop Ning Ke from becoming a Buddha. But it couldn't reach the other side. Because the Buddha on the other side was no longer the same Buddha. Time kept passing. Because no one was watching, no one knew whether it was fast or slow. The Bodhi tree growing out of Ning Ke's body became more and more luxuriant. Countless green leaves grew out of the countless branches, and the green leaves were like futons. More and more Buddhas sat on them, as if they were bearing fruits. They were heavy, and the harvest was very gratifying. There were more than thousands of Buddhas converted to Ning Quebec. One more Buddha on the Bodhi tree meant one less Buddha on the boat. But there were too many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the boat, and no change could be seen for the time being. Ning Ke didn't know what was going on outside, nor did he know the time. He quietly closed his eyes, scattered the lotus flowers, and casually placed his hands on the cliff rocks on the peak to cultivate his Buddhism with Sang Sang. 1,000 years had passed in the world inside the Buddha's chessboard, and 3 years had passed in the real human world. It was the 5th year of Zhengshi in the Tang Empire, and the 3454 year of Daji in West Hill. Another spring came. Willow catkins fluttered in the sky, peach blossoms in the West Hill Divine Palace, cherry blossoms in the Great River Kingdom, and wild flowers in the weeds in the wilderness, but the pear tree didn't blossom. Is it a pear tree or an iron tree? People in the back of the mountain of the academy surrounded the pear tree by the lake. They were annoyed to see the unresponsive branches and the rustling leaves. In the past 3 years, they had tried everything they could to open the Buddha's chessboard, and it seemed that they could only wait for the pear tree to blossom and bear fruit before they could enter the chessboard. However, according to eldest brother, the pear tree would blossom and bear fruit every 500 years. How many people could live for 500 years? The pear tree didn't blossom, and neither did the peach blossoms in the meadow in front of the academy. There were very few flowers in Chang'an because there wasn't much rain this spring. The spring thunder roared between the clouds, and the air was a little dry. It was strange that there was thunder but no rain. Eldest brother stood on the stone steps in front of the main hall of the palace and looked at the increasingly dense and gloomy clouds in the sky, feeling a little puzzled. Suddenly, a thick bolt of lightning appeared in the thick clouds and struck somewhere in the city with a roar. The God-stunning array sensed it and emitted a clear light. Eldest brother's figure faded slightly and instantly came to the Wanyan Tower. Looking at the temple that was struck by the lightning and the Buddha statue that had become black, he vaguely understood something. He came to the city wall and looked around. He saw that the clouds seemed to cover the entire continent, and lightning struck from time to time, causing black smoke to appear somewhere on the ground. The black smoke was rising from the Buddha's temples. The next moment, eldest brother returned to the back of the mountain of the academy and came to the pear tree by the lake. He quietly looked at the chessboard for a long time, and a sincere and joyful smile appeared on his lips. Eldest brother smiled. Everyone in the back of the mountain was very surprised. These years, eldest brother had been busy with state affairs, preparing for the war, teaching the new emperor, and worrying about Ning Ke's life in the chessboard. It had been very hard for him, and he hadn't smiled like this for a long time. Spring thunder bloomed everywhere in the human world, but there was still no rain. The first 3 halls of the Lang temple had all been struck by lightning, and the Buddha statue had collapsed. It was like the rubble on the peak of Hua Mountain. The stones in the mountains and valleys were covered with moss overnight, emitting the smell of the sea breeze. Monk Guan Hai led the monks in the temple and sat cross-legged in front of the dilapidated hall. His face was pale and he kept chanting Buddhist scriptures. The blind monk was enlightened and kept shouting like a madman. He grabbed the moss on the mountain rocks and shouted, "Something's wrong. I feel something's wrong. Something is going to happen. On the cliff platform of the West Hill Divine Palace, the Abbey Dean sat in a wheelchair and looked at the dark clouds covering the sky and the lightning that struck from time to time in the distance. He said, "Prepare the great sacrifice to welcome the return of our Lord." The war at the bottom of the giant sinkhole in the West Wilderness was still going on. The uprising serfs had grown to tens of thousands, and they were fighting fiercely with the aristocratic armed forces and the monk soldiers of the Xiankong Temple in the wilderness. The sound of arrows rang in the wilderness, and miserable howls rose one after another. There was blood everywhere, and death was everywhere. At this moment, a thick bolt of lightning suddenly fell from the dark clouds in the sky. The bolt of lightning accurately struck the Mahavira Hall at the peak of the mountain. With a loud crack, half of the hall collapsed, and the Buddha statue in the hall turned into black powder. Jun Mo held the iron sword horizontally in front of his chest, and politely kept Qin Yan and the elders of the commandment hall a few miles away. He looked at the black smoke coming from the peak and said indifferently, "The Buddha was defeated. Can you still win?" After more than 10 days of spring thunder, there was more than 10 days of spring rain. This year's spring rain was not patter, but it was extremely violent, constantly washing the earth that had been ravaged by lightning. The rain fell on the dilapidated Buddhist temple, on the dilapidated Buddhist statues, and on the pale-faced monks, washing away the remaining Buddhist aura. It was also raining in the back mountain of the academy. The rain hit the green leaves of the pear tree, and then flowed down, wetting the chessboard under the pear tree and the people who had been watching the chessboard for years. Sixth Brother's naked body was covered with water drops. He waved the iron hammer down violently, and as he moved, the water drops were shaken off his body and flew around like arrows. They had been smashing the chessboard for years, and they were exhausted physically and mentally, but they never thought of giving up. Moreover, eldest brother smiled, which meant that the chessboard was about to be smashed. The hammering sound was like spring thunder, and the sweat fell like rain. One day, a light sound suddenly came from the chessboard. A thin line appeared on the Tianyuan position of the chessboard. This thin line was actually a crack, and the crack was very small. If one did not look carefully, he could not find its existence at all. One day, a light sound suddenly came from his mind. Ning Ke opened his eyes and looked at the big ship that was still sailing to the other side. He was silent for a long time, and then reached out to pluck the Bodhi tree between his eyebrows and smiled. The Bodhi tree had grown extremely lush. The green leaves seemed to cover the dark sky, and not a single ray of Buddhist light could penetrate it. There were thousands of Buddhas sitting on the green leaves. The Buddhas had different appearances and postures, but they were all worshipping him devoutly. The Bodhi tree was so huge, but he lifted it casually and then took 2 steps to the side. At this time, Sang Sang also woke up and walked to him with the big black umbrella. Ning Ke inserted the Bodhi tree somewhere on the peak. This peak was the Buddha, a dark and thin Buddha named Sang Sang, who was dressed in a handmaiden's clothes. The Bodhi tree inserted on the peak was like a flower in Sang Sang's hair. Ning Ke looked back at Sang Sang and held her hand. There was a small white flower in Sang Sang's hair. A dragon needed to be painted to wake up, and a Buddha needed to pick a flower. Ning Ke picked the flower and inserted it into Sang Sang's hair, and the Buddha woke up. The small white flower in Sang Sang's hair swayed in the wind, and the Bodhi tree on the peak swayed. All the Buddhas sitting on the green leaves prayed to her. Ning Ke felt that all the Buddhas were flowing into his and Sang Sang's bodies. He laughed, and so did Sang Sang. All the Buddhas on the Bodhi tree also laughed. Sang Sang's smile gradually disappeared, and she became as quiet as the universe. All the Buddhas also fell silent. Sang Sang's expression was indifferent as she looked at every corner of the world, and the world returned to indifference. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the big ship looked a little confused. The indigo lion roared, but it couldn't resist the pressure from the Buddha. With a reluctant whine, it could no longer support its body and knelt down toward the peak. I forgot to write the number of chapters in the last chapter. When I updated it last night, my eyes were really closed. Some readers have been saying that an elephant's nose has no bones. I know this. At the beginning of that chapter, I explained it through Ninkei's mouth. In the following chapters, I also said that it is composed of broken bones. As for why I wrote a bone nose, it was purely because of the need of fighting beauty. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 995. Ninkei and Sangsang immediately became Buddhas of heaven. Before the Buddhas of heaven, all living beings had to bow their heads. However, if they wanted to completely control the world and the chessboard, they would have to take away all the others' business, which would take many years. Ninkei didn't want to wait any longer, so he reached out and held the hilt. With this simple movement, the world changed again. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on the big ship and the field felt an unprecedented danger. The chanting became more and more shrill, like cuckoo crying blood. They desperately instilled their breath of Buddha into the world, giving out more and more light of Buddha. The light of Buddha between heaven and earth became extremely bright, and more than 10 strands of it even penetrated the heavy green leaves of the Bodhi tree on the peak and fell on Sangsang, making her face pale. Countless rays of light flashed in the dark sky. There were heavenly flowers, golden branches, and stories of enlightenment. It was the Buddha's kingdom of Buddha and Ninkei's and Sangsang's kingdom of Buddha. They overlapped and were indistinguishable. Ninkei pulled out his iron cutlass and chopped at the dark sky. With a soft sound, the golden light in the sky shook slightly. The pagoda, the temple statue, and the Chiu Nu holding the zither were all cut in half. The cutlass was endless. After cutting the Buddha's kingdom, it fell on the dark sky, leaving a crack of hundreds of miles in the sky above the peak. Even if it was a bucket full of water, it would be difficult for the water in the bucket to flow out quickly if only one cut was made. Generally speaking, another cut would be made at the intersection of the previous cut. Ninkei waved his cutlass again, and a clear crack appeared in the dark sky again. It met the previous crack in the sky above the peak, covering hundreds of miles of field. The two cracks looked like a word, or a wound of the sky. Thousands of Buddhas in the Bodhi tree on the peak closed their eyes, put their palms together, and chanted the Buddhist scriptures loudly, pouring their devout faith and willpower into Ninkei's body. Looking at the two knife marks in the sky and the word formed by the knife marks, Ninkei smiled with satisfaction. It had been a long time since the battle with the Abbey Dean. If the time in the world of the chessboard was counted, it might have been 1,000 years. After 1,000 years, he finally wrote that word again. Sangsang looked at the word in the sky and said after a moment of silence, "It's a good word." Ninkei thought for a while and said, "I can't write it without you." He didn't even know how he wrote the word. It was a mysterious realm that was hard to explain with words. The most fundamental reason was that he and Sangsang had become one. God came to the human world, so he was able to write the word human. This was a stroke of genius. Rain began to fall from the sky. The rain did not come from the clouds, but from the higher sky. Clear water flowed down from the two cracks cut by Ninkei, forming hundreds of thousands of waterfalls. The waterfalls fell on the field and became a rainstorm. This rainstorm lasted for an entire year. A year later, boundless starlight fell from the two cracks and mixed into the waterfall in the sky. It was suffused with a cold and beautiful luster, looking like some kind of sticky fruit pulp. The star plasma flowed for another year. Ninkei and Sangsang looked at the two cracks. He saw the beautiful scenery, while she saw the rain and starry sky in the human world. She saw her own world. During the 2 years, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas committed suicide. The Buddha's light in the nirvana fought against the rain and stars from the human world. Sometimes it was dim, sometimes it was bright, and finally it was annihilated. At the last moment, Buddha, who was hiding among all living beings, made the world launch the most powerful attack on Ning Ke and Sang Sang, trying to stop them from leaving. In the rainstorm, countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas floated in the air thousands of feet high, surrounding the mountain peak. Countless celestial devices glowed with golden light and approached the mountain peak. The big ship was only one step away from the cliff. In the rainstorm, Sang Sang stood on the peak with her black hair dancing wildly. The flowers in her indigo dress gradually disappeared. She quietly looked at the countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas around her and raised her right hand to the sky. She had seen her own world, connected with the rules, and naturally the power of heaven was reborn. She raised her hand, and the rainstorm falling from the cracks in the sky suddenly became bright, because a star in the distant night sky on the other side of the crack suddenly became countless times brighter. The stars in the Hautian world were not burning stars. The reason why they suddenly brightened was not because of an explosion, but because the distance between the star and the observer was rapidly shortening. A dazzling bright spot appeared in the crack. The bright spot arrived in an instant and easily passed through the crack, the majestic rain, and came to the inside of the chessboard world and the peak. A star fell in Sang Sang's hand. Sang Sang's hand shone brightly. Countless extremely bright rays of light shot from the peak to the surrounding fields, easily evaporating the falling rain and continuing to spread. Ning Ke took out his sunglasses and put them on. The celestial devices containing infinite power of Buddha in the sky outside the peak melted and broke in a very short time when they encountered the light emitted by the stars, and finally turned into wisps of green smoke. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas floating in the rain felt the extremely terrible power of heaven and fled to the periphery of the field. But there were still thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who were purified into nothingness by the light of the stars. Starlight sprinkled from the peak, and the river glowed with silver light. It was extraordinarily quiet. The big ship was also motionless. It was still one step away from the cliff, but it could no longer get closer. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas fled to the field behind the big ship in horror. It was dark and dense, like a receding tide. The indigo lion turned into a wisp of green light and instantly fled to the horizon. Looking at these scenes, Sang Sang's face showed no expression. She walked to the edge of the cliff, stretched out her hand into the rainstorm, and slightly loosened her fingers, letting the star fall in her hand. The star came to the foot of the mountain and fell into the river, stirring up huge waves hundreds of feet high. The big ship was shaking and creaking, as if it would fall apart at any time. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who were running on the ship were shaken into the sky, and then fell heavily to their deaths. Golden Buddha's blood splashed everywhere. The horrible vibration came from the bottom of the river to the field, and the ground shook at a high speed like a drum being beaten hard. The Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, cicadas and frogs were like raindrops on the drum, instantly shattered. The star smashed a bottomless hole deep in the river, and the mud was burned into porcelain chips by the high temperature. Endless underground spring gushed out of the hole, and instantly dyed the river black. The river was overflowing, and thousands of golden ponds were flooded. In the storm, it turned into a boundless black sea at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Black Sea set off huge waves hundreds of feet high, and slapped in all directions of the field. Wherever the waves passed, both hard stones and soft willow branches were smashed into the finest pieces. Countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas rose and fell in the Black Sea, screaming, and then they were swallowed. The indigo lion was shaken into the sky, and fell heavily into the sea. Relying on its height of hundreds of feet, it desperately kicked the field at the bottom of the sea, and kept paddling with its forelimbs. Looking at the tragic scene around it, its eyes were filled with confusion and fear. It thought that if the Black Sea was allowed to flood, what could be preserved in this world? The storm was heavy, and the world was restless. Only the mountain was silent and stable in the surging Black Sea. Looking from a distance, it looked like Sang Sang was standing alone in the sea. The mountain was the handmaiden statue, and the flower on the peak was the Bodhi tree. There were thousands of Buddhas in the Bodhi tree. Ning Ke and Sang Sang stood under the Bodhi tree, watching the sea and the people wandering in misery. Sang Sang saw the indigo lion in the distance, and reached out to grab it. The indigo lion screamed and was caught by her to the peak. Being grabbed by the neck, it did not dare to move at all, and trembled. It was no longer as powerful as it used to be. Soaked, it was only a foot long, and looked like a drowning dog. The raging Black Sea rushed to the distance. It would not be long before the real Styx River and the redwood forest on both sides of the river would become ruins. After a while, Chaoyang's city would be destroyed, and the Buddha land would become a real swamp country, unable to regain its former glory. All this was because Sang Sang had picked a star. Sang Sang looked at the tragic scene of the Buddha land without any emotion or pity. She kept using the power of heaven to make the Black Sea more violent. She wanted to destroy the world with the flood. She had been trapped here by the Buddha for more than 1,000 years. If Ning Ke had not woken up, she would have been lost here, unable to find herself, and Haotian would have become a prisoner in the chessboard. This was a humiliation she could not bear. Her indigo dress was full of anger and negative emotions, and she had to vent them in some way. That's enough. Ning Ke said, the grass, trees, and stones in this world could all be the Buddha. If you want to kill him, you have to destroy the world. It will take too long, and you may not succeed. Sang Sang did not say anything, looking for the trace of the Buddha in the waves and the storm. Ning Ke walked to the edge of the cliff, took her hand, and said quietly, let's go. After a moment of silence, Sang Sang said, let's go. Ning Ke turned to look at the thousands of Buddhas on the Bodhi tree, raised one hand to his chest, and sincerely saluted, brothers. Brothers, I'm leaving. The Bodhi tree swayed gently in the storm, and thousands of Buddhas sitting on the green leaves chanted the name of Buddha calmly. They put their palms together and praised, farewell, Buddha. Ning Ke and Sang Sang held hands and slowly floated away from the peak. Against the storm and the starlight in the rain, they flew toward the intersection of the two cracks in the dark sky. The indigo lion did not dare to struggle in Sang Sang's hand. It looked at the doomsday-like scene in the Buddha land and felt sad, knowing that it could never come back. At the back of the mountain of the academy, Sixth Brother was still smashing the chessboard, and people were still watching it. The spring rain was like smoke and fog, wetting the pear tree, people's clothes, and the chessboard. Eldest Brother did not go back to the palace tonight, but stood under the pear tree, looking at something thoughtfully. He did not look at the chessboard, but at the sky and the stars in the night sky. All of a sudden, a star left its original position, turned into a streamer, and came to the ground. In an instant, it came to the back of the mountain, broke the cloud gate array, and fell on the chessboard. A loud bang resounded. The people around the chessboard were shocked. They wondered why the stars would fall. What would happen if they hit the flowers, grass, and people like them? Who could react in time? The meteor fell, and the small crack on the Tianyuan position of the chessboard seemed to widen. Eldest Brother looked at the chessboard and said with a smile, welcome back. I recommend Fat Tabby Cat, that is, Zhang Yu's new book, Phoenix Throne, Reincarnation of the Sun, no, Reincarnation of the Sun and Song of the Sky Sword. The quality of the new book is guaranteed, and it is trustworthy. Please enjoy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 996. Ning Ke appeared beside the chessboard. His clothes were ragged and he was soaked. His skin was dark, and he was thin and tired. He looked like a refugee fleeing from a famine. He was extremely pitiful. Seventh sister Mu Yu's eyes turned red. She stepped forward and touched his head. The rest of the senior brothers also surrounded him and kept patting his head to express their complicated feelings. They hadn't seen their beloved youngest brother for 4 years. It was natural for them to be excited when they reunited after such a long time. As for Ning Kai, he had been separated from his senior brothers and sisters for 1,000 years. It was more than a long time. It was as if countless reincarnations had passed. He was so excited to meet them again. He missed them very much after not seeing them for 1,000 years. Ning Kai held fourth brother in his arms and patted his back hard. Then he did the same to fifth brother, sixth brother, 11th brother, Wang Qi, and even seventh sister. Finally, he walked to eldest brother and bowed to the ground. Senior brother, I'm back. It's good that you're back. Eldest brother said with a smile. His expression was still so gentle and calm, as if he wouldn't care even if the sky fell down. But somehow, his voice was slightly trembling. Thinking of the time spent in the chessboard world and how he almost forgot his existence there, Ning Kai had mixed feelings. He said, I'll never leave again. Beigong walked to him and asked with concern, what on earth happened? Ning Kai briefly described his experience in the chessboard world. He mentioned that he was cultivating Buddhism in the White Tower Temple and almost fell unconscious. Then he was woken up by 2 axes. The axe in the ocean of consciousness is Lotus's consciousness. What is the axe in the sky? If it wasn't for the axe that kept striking me, I might not have woken up. Ning Kai said, everything has an answer. Now this is the thing that I haven't figured out. Who is striking me and who is saving me? Hearing this, everyone turned to look at sixth brother. Sixth brother stood beside the chessboard, still holding the extremely thick iron hammer in his hand. Ning Kai understood that the sound of the axe coming from the sky was the sound of the hammer falling. Each axe represented a psyche from outside the chessboard, and that psyche was calling him back. Only then did he know that during the years when he was trapped in the chessboard, his senior brother had been trying to open the chessboard. Thinking of the hard work and affection, his eyes were slightly wet, and he bowed to the sixth brother. Sixth brother helped him up and said embarrassedly, everyone smashed. I'm just good at wielding hammers, so I smashed a little more. Eldest brother is the one who is really powerful. Ning Kai naturally knew this. He bowed again to his fellow disciples around the chessboard. Song Qian said that younger brother did not need to be so courteous, so he stopped bowing and thanked them. Instead, he hugged everyone again. In this round of hugs, he didn't even let go of the eldest brother, let alone the seventh sister. Mu Yu stepped back to avoid his arms and said shyly, I'm married. Ning Kai didn't get to hug her. He was a little unwilling and asked, I know. So what? Mu Yu said seriously, men and women shouldn't touch each other. I let you hug me because I felt sorry for you. How could you keep hugging me? Who cares? If you really want to find an excuse. Senior sister, you let me hug you on behalf of second brother. Ning Kai smiled and took her into his arms. He hugged her so hard that she almost couldn't breathe. When Mu Yu's feet touched the ground, she naturally complained. The big white goose appeared out of nowhere and fiercely pecked at Ning Kai's ankle. The pain made Ning Kai break out in a cold sweat and he almost fell to the ground. Ning Kai looked at the big white goose that had retreated to the side and said with lingering fear, this guy is really a good guard. If I were to plant some red apricots in the wall, they would definitely be eaten up by it as soon as they grow. Mu Yu took out clothes and towels from the wooden box that the big white goose was dragging. She walked to Ning Kai and wiped the rain off his body. She said, why are you all wet? Ning Kai looked at the rain on the chessboard and said, it should be the rain that leaked in. Third sister, Yu Lian, was far away in the eastern wilderness. Mu Yu was the only girl left in the back of the mountain of the academy. She might not be the housewife, but it was reasonable for her to take care of her brothers. She took off Ning Kei's wet clothes and put on a new one. She looked him up and down and felt it was a little loose. She couldn't help feeling sad and said, "You are so thin. What the hell is that place?" Ning Kei thought of the Styx River and said with a wry smile, "We did see a lot of ghosts there." Mu Yu said, "Since it is a ghost place, why did she go there?" Ning Kei said, "She wanted to kill Buddha, but Buddha set a trap in the chessboard." The cliff platform of the back of the mountain suddenly became very quiet. The big white goose and the birds in the forest all held their breath nervously. The fish in the lake and the stream didn't dare to get away from their tails for fear of making the sound of water. They gradually sank to the bottom of the lake and stream, looking very pitiful. Because Ning Kei mentioned her, they remembered that she was also the one who left the chessboard. They all looked at the pear tree, their bodies extremely stiff. After the chessboard was opened, Ning Kei and his brothers and sisters hugged and talked about the future. It had been a long time, but no one thought of her. She didn't want to be noticed, so no one could find her, not even eldest brother. They all looked at Sang Sang under the pear tree. Sang Sang looked at the pear tree quietly. No one knew what she was thinking. When they saw Sang Sang clearly, they became more and more uneasy. Her left hand was behind her back, and her right hand was hanging by her side. Her fingers were slightly bent, and she was holding an indigo dog. It was common for a young lady to have a pet, but no one would hold the pet in her hand like a sword instead of holding it in her arms. The indigo dog closed its eyes tightly in her hand, as if it was pretending to be dead. It was dead silent by the lake. The pear tree was blown by the mountain breeze, and dozens of water drops fell. Eldest brother looked at her quietly and then reached for the wooden stick at his waist. Fourth brother Fan Yu walked to the iron-making house by the stream, where the river and mountain sandbox was. Fifth brother Song Qian and eighth brother reached out to grab the black and white chess pieces, their fingers trembling. Sixth brother held the iron hammer tightly, and his muscles were like mountain rocks. An embroidery needle appeared between Mu Yu's fingers, and the tactical array of the cloud gate on the mountain road moved slightly. Beigong sat cross-legged with the zither across his chest. Shimen stood behind him with the vertical flute between his lips. In a few seconds, everyone was ready to fight, and they used their strongest means. Because Sang Sang under the pear tree was Haotian, the most powerful and unavoidable enemy of the academy. Wang Qi was very distressed. He was good at debating, flowers and plants, and poisons, but none of them could defeat Haotian. Haotian wouldn't reason with him, so how could she be poisoned to death? He looked left and right, and finally his eyes fell on the little white flower in Song Song's hair, which was slightly trembling in the wind. He said in a trembling voice, "This flower is very beautiful. Where did you pick it?" It's okay, it's okay. She's still my wife." Looking at the tense situation, Ning Kei said hurriedly. But Sang Sang ignored him, so it was hard to believe that she was really okay, which made him feel a little embarrassed. It was dead silent under the pear tree, and only the mountain wind passed through the holes of the flute and the strings of the zither could be heard. After a long time, Sang Sang finally stopped looking at the pear tree, and turned to the crowd. She said emotionlessly, "Because of Ning Kei, I won't kill you today." Hearing this, Ning Kei was finally relieved, and his legs felt a little weak. Sang Sang had been rid of the three poisons of greed, anger and obsession, and the power of heaven had come again. No matter how powerful eldest brother and the academy were in the human world, they couldn't be her opponent. Their lives were in her hands. "See, I said it's okay." He patted his chest and said proudly, "I have face." Beigong felt very embarrassed, and said, "You've lost the face of the academy." Ning Kei explained seriously, "Live first, and then we'll talk about face." Sang Sang reached out her hand, and the chessboard fell into her hand. She looked at the people of the academy and said, "I want this." Although she didn't use a question, it was actually a question. The crowd was a little surprised, and then they shook their heads. Although the academy liked to do things against heaven, no one really wanted to fight with Haotian. It was Bei Gong who showed a different spirit. He suppressed the nervousness in his heart, and his trembling fingers plucked the strings of the zither, making a tinkling sound. He said, "I say, even if this chessboard is the property of the couple, at least half of it belongs to my youngest brother, right? What do you want to do? Don't you have to get his consent first?" Ning Ke was speechless. He knew why Sang Sang wanted the chessboard. She was trapped in the chessboard by Buddha for 1,000 years, and almost lost her nature. Even he felt angry and depressed, not to mention the proud Haotian. Sang Sang wouldn't let it go like this. She didn't destroy the world in the chessboard, and she didn't kill Buddha, who was still unknown. She must do something to get peace. But the chessboard was extraordinary, and even Haotian couldn't break it in a short time. So what was she going to do with the chessboard? Where would her wrath fall? Sang Sang picked up the chessboard and waved her arm. The flowers on her sleeves bloomed, and a gentle breeze blew. The array in tent above the cliff yard was torn open, and the chessboard flew out of the crack. It flew into the sky and turned into a small black spot. Then it turned into a streamer and fell to the far west. In the depths of the western wilderness, the war in the underground world of the giant sinkhole was still going on. Tens of thousands of rebellious serfs fought bravely in the encirclement of countless enemies. Countless lights of Buddha and blood kept splashing. Suddenly, a shrill cry sounded in the sky. The serfs with crude weapons and the soldier monks with iron rods looked at the sky in astonishment. The battlefield became quiet. A straight line appeared in the sky, coming from the far east. It tore the clouds and the air apart and went straight to the Mahavira hall of the Xiankong temple on the top of the Prajna peak. With a loud bang, the Mahavira hall, which had been half collapsed by the spring thunder a few days ago, disappeared in an instant, turning into a cloud of dust composed of countless particles. The giant peak trembled. Countless yellow temples collapsed, countless Buddha statues were broken, and countless monks vomited blood and died. The terrible vibration spread to the field. Countless warhorses neighed in fear and knelt down. The Mahavira hall was completely destroyed, and only the flat cliff yard was left on the peak. A dark hole appeared in the cliff, and the rocks were eroded by the high temperature into quicksand. Countless dust and sparks sprayed out of the hole, almost touching the clouds. The Xiankong temple suffered a disaster because Sang Sang threw the chessboard back from the back of the mountain of the academy. She used the chessboard of Buddha to blow a deep hole in the remains of Buddha. The chessboard went through the whole mountain and continued to go to the bottom of the field. It penetrated hard rocks and hot rivers, and did not stop. It went to the terrible magma layer. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.